I'm going to call the hearing to order, and the plan is, since we do about, and Mr. Waxman's here, since we do about 10 minutes on each side opening statements, we can start doing those, and then Shelley's just joined us, and we can wait for Doc Hastings, and then we'll go to your opening statements. Tradition here is on the committee is that we'll go to members for their opening statements after ours, and then because of our schedules, we'll just move to the second panel after that. So with that, I'll begin and recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I call this hearing to order to recognize myself. This is a part of our ongoing effort at the committee to make certain we are providing safe and sustainable long-term storage at high-level spent nuclear fuel. Specifically today, we focus our attention on the part of the Department of Energy plays and the process by which decisions have been made when it comes to the long-term repository. No matter if you support the continued use of nuclear energy or if you don't, we have a responsibility to deal with the existing spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste materials from our nation's defense complex. As we sit in this room, spent nuclear fuel from commercial power plants is piling up and remains scattered around the country in 2/3 of our states. It was always a determination that the federal government, not the individual states, and not the utility companies, would take responsibility for the safe storage of spent fuel and other nuclear materials. After a careful search, we found a scientifically proven geologically ideal site to store these materials. That's on secure federal property in a remote desert deep under Yucca Mountain. Now we are at a crossroads. Politics, not science, is driving the debate. It's time for us to decide if we will keep our end of the deal with the nation's citizens by delivering exactly what they've been paying for all these years, or if we'll waste ratepayers and taxpayer money by failing to deliver on our end of the contract. Recently, the Government Accountability Office released a report examining the results of the Obama administration's withdrawal of the Yucca Mountain license application. What GAO found was that this unilateral decision comes at a cost of $15 billion so far, $9.5 billion of it directly collected from every American's electricity bill. But the fleecing of taxpayers won't end there. GAO estimates taxpayers are already on the hook for $15 billion and an additional $500 million for each year the project is delayed beyond 2020. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury will be paying out taxpayer dollars, not ratepayer dollars, in judgments to utilities for DOE's breach of contract. Billions of dollars and over 30 years of research from our nation's top scientists were jettisoned, not for technical or safety reasons, but as the GAO report stated, social and political opposition to a permanent repository, not technical issues, is the key obstacle. When I visited Yucca Mountain last month, I heard firsthand the overwhelming support from local residents and officials from the 7 surrounding counties. We will hear firsthand of that support today from those representing locals closest to Yucca Mountain. Locals who raise families in that area and know it is safe. Those who would be directly affected the most took it upon themselves to ensure the safety of their children and grandchildren through an independent scientific investigative program. And what they found was high-level nuclear fuel could be stored at Yucca Mountain while keeping their water supply safe, a major concern particularly for locals. They also know it has the ability to infuse desperately needed jobs, both directly and indirectly related to the Yucca Mountain site. We must not let the political game stop us from keeping a promise to taxpayers. The licensing process for Yucca Mountain must legally continue so that we can give the American people the surety of a safe, centralized, permanent storage site for spent nuclear fuel. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today to give us their perspective on moving forward. I look forward to their verbal testimony and willingness to answer any questions members may have. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time and recognize the ranking member, Mr. Barrow from Georgia.
Thank you, Chairman Shimkus, for holding this hearing, and I appreciate the participation of all of our witnesses today. Mr. Green has asked me to fill his chair in his absence, and I like to think that at least in part it's because he knows something about my district that makes this hearing particularly important to me. Considering both the commercial and the defense applications, I probably represent as many people touched by the nuclear industry as anyone else in Congress. I'm proud to represent the expanding Plant Vogtle in Burke County, Georgia. And I also represent a large percentage of the people who work at the Savannah River site just across the river in South Carolina. The workers, the families, and associated industries attached to those facilities number many thousands, and other positive economic impacts are very high. For example, Burt County collects about 75% of all of its tax revenues from just Plant Vogtle. That's a lot of school books, police cars, and trash pickups from just one corporate citizen. However, those benefits bring challenges. The nuclear industry is only as safe as we make it. Up till this point, we've managed the processes and the waste well, and we've had a very safe industry. However, as the industry grows, as it's doing in Georgia and a couple of other places around the country, and as the waste accumulates, we need to have a concerted waste management strategy. I believe we're too far down the Yucca Mountain Road in time and in money to turn back now. But if we aren't going to pursue Yucca, then we need to be working together on another strategy, and we need to stick with it. That's one reason why I'm disappointed that the Blue Ribbon Commission was unable to participate today. The Blue Ribbon Commission was recently in my district at Vogtle and at Savannah River site. I'm hopeful they'll have some concrete consensus solutions to offer, and I suggest that it's in the committee's best interest to have them back as soon as possible. I know the witnesses today will have some good insight on the way forward. I want to thank them for their time. I want to thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time as Mr. Barton makes his way up here. That's okay. The chair would like to recognize the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Barton, for the 5 minutes, which hopefully he'll apportion out to Mr. Whitfield and Mr. Gardner if he shows.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our distinguished first panel of members. It's good to see you, and we're especially glad that Congressman Hastings is back. We hope you're healthy, and just remember this is the Energy and Commerce Committee. No more shenanigans like you were trying earlier. Mr. Chairman, our nation is sitting on 13,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. Our nation is sitting on over 65,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel from commercial nuclear power plants in 75 sites in 33 states. That's 78,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel in over 80 sites in over 33 states. Yucca Mountain was approved by the previous administration as a repository for our nuclear waste. As you well know, we spent over $15 billion in taxpayer and ratepayer funds through 2009. It's clear that safe and permanent storage of nuclear waste is a critical element of a long-term energy strategy. Study after study has shown that Yucca Mountain is suitable for storage of that waste. We're now here today to discuss the Department of Energy's reckless decision to terminate the Yucca Mountain repository. In my opinion, the administration decided to ignore the science and circumvent the law. This administration has, for what I think are political reasons, determined that Yucca is not a workable option and is proposing that millions of taxpayer dollars be spent in further studies. I think it's unsettling that DOE stopped short of characterizing Yucca as unsuitable, instead chose unworkable. It seems clear that the administration did this to circumvent the law as defined by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to avoid explaining to the Congress the basis for their determination. We know that the economic impact of DO's decision are tremendous. There's no guarantee that a more acceptable or less costly alternative can be identified, which will only prolong the need for interim storage of spent nuclear fuel at existing reactor sites. Delays in opening a repository have already created an estimated $15.6 billion in taxpayer liability, plus an additional $500 million each year beyond 2020. This is not only a financial issue, but it's also a national security issue. We cannot have over 78,000 tons of radioactive waste scattered across 75 sites. We need a central repository, and in my opinion, that repository is Yucca Mountain. At this point, I would like to yield to the distinguished subcommittee chairman, Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. I would just like to say this is, in my view, a perfect example of a wasteful federal government on a very important project. You've already heard about the amount of money that has been spent, $15 billion. You've heard about 65,000 tons located in 33 states and 75 sites. You've heard about the legal liability of the federal government being sued by nuclear power plants because the federal government has not taken responsibility for this material, and that's an ongoing liability. That liability is already in excess of $15 billion, estimated to easily go up to $50 billion. And it's no wonder the American people are frustrated with the federal government and this $14 trillion federal debt that we have. So I want to thank Chairman Shimkus for having this important hearing to bring attention to the predicament we find ourselves in, and hopefully we can find a solution. And I would yield back.
I'm supposed to yield to Mr. Gardner, but I don't see him. So
If the Chairman Emeritus would yield to Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania.
Okay, I will yield the remaining time to Dr. Murphy.
Thank you very much. Well, we know that the states are suing the Department of Energy because of the mandate with an application to approve waste storage in Yucca Mountain. And the utilities have sued the DOE to halt further collection of fees, arguing that the country no longer has a disposal plan after ruling out Yucca Mountain. Simply put, the administration is acting in violation of the law. You've heard from other members about the 65,000 metric tons of spent fuel and the 75 different sites of storage. Well, nuclear provides 20% of the electricity in this country, and with superb advancements in technologies like small modular reactors and passive safety systems, it stands poised for a renaissance. But only if the administration gives the taxpayers an explanation, offers to Congress a workable resolution, not saying this is unworkable, and also acts in concordance with the law, to apply the law, not to selectively enforce the law. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. And the chair now recognizes the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a strong advocate for serious oversight. Throughout my service on the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and this committee, I've led numerous investigations into governmental agencies, private companies, and entire industrial sectors. And I take the role of congressional investigator very seriously. Today, this committee is holding its second hearing on the decision to shut down the Yucca Mountain Waste Repository Project. Questions have been raised about this decision, and I support a fair and impartial inquiry. But that does not appear to be what this committee is doing. Even before the committee launched its investigation, Chairman Shimkus had apparently already reached his own conclusions. In January, the chairman told The Hill that he wanted to ask questions about whether the decision to, quote, pull the plug, end quote, on Yucca Mountain was, quote, all politics, end quote. He stated that he thought people already knew the answer to that question, but you should go through the process of asking the questions. Then last month, he called the decision to halt the Yucca Mountain license application and review politics at its worst, at its highest levels. Full Committee Chairman Upton has made similar comments. A congressional investigation should be a genuine inquiry, not a process of asking questions to reach a predetermined conclusion. At our first hearing, the chairman tried to prevent members from asking relevant and important questions, and I believe was off base in his criticism of my right to question the NRC chairman, Gregory Yazko. The latest affront to fairness is the effort to prevent Democratic staff from attending committee interviews of fact witnesses. Ranking Member Green and I wrote a letter today to Chairman Upton and Shimkus protesting this new policy, which I asked to be made part of the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Excluding Democratic staff from committee interviews is inappropriate, and it's inconsistent with committee precedents. The practice denies nearly half the members of the committee equal access to relevant information about the investigation. It wastes taxpayers' resources by necessitating duplicative interviews, and it calls into question the basic fairness and credibility of the committee's inquiry. Our job should be to keep an open mind in the investigation and follow the facts where they lead. If the evidence shows that the Department of Energy decided to close Yucca Mountain for invalid reasons, we should not hesitate to be critical. But we should also not prejudge the facts or use unfair and partisan procedures in conducting this investigation. Mr. Chairman, we are still at the early stages of this investigation. I hope we can resolve these procedural differences so we can focus on the work of the investigation. We can do it together, and I think that's the best goal of an oversight investigation, to work together and see if we can get the facts and then follow them wherever they may lead. I hope this hearing and the witnesses we will hear from today will get us back on track. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Before we go to the witnesses, I would ask unanimous consent for 1 minute to respond to the comment. Is there objection?
Reserving the right, would you give me a potential minute to respond if I feel it's appropriate?
I would, sir.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. First of all, the issue raised is not timely with this hearing, but the point we want to raise is that the majority staff has been in discussion with this issue in good faith with the minority staff. But we also have raised the issue that you're asking for a double standard. It is my understanding that the minority has had meetings with other witnesses during this session of Congress and has not included the majority or provided notice to the majority. If we're going to have a rule about this, it has to apply to both sides equally. And I think if you agree to allow us, when you're questioning your folks, we can reciprocate by having you with ours. And I think that would be a great way to resolve this conflict. It is my understanding that when you all were in control in the last Congress, Republicans were not included in all the discussions with potential witnesses and conducted interviews without notifying members on our side. Having put that on the table, I would just say if we can come to an agreement where when you're interviewing your witnesses, you invite us, we'll invite you when we're interviewing, and I think that could resolve the conflict. I yield back my time. I would.
Thank you for yielding to me. It's important to distinguish between consulting with agency experts to understand policy issues and bringing in fact witnesses to obtain information relating to an investigation of alleged wrongdoing. There's no question that the interviews of the NRC employees from which the minority were excluded were, in fact witnesses regarding our investigation. And I think if we agree that when we interview anybody who has pertinent information on the facts of the investigation, that we all should be included, and I think your suggestion would be appropriate. My staff has spoken with the three of the individuals who were interviewed, and each of them spent several hours in these interviews. So in fact, as a reality, what we did is spend more time with the same witnesses. We should have been there together. In the investigation relating to Yucca Mountain licensing process, the minority has not conducted any fact witness interviews, either with or without the majority. We've instead been focused on reviewing and understanding the documents that have been produced to the committee on this matter. In fact, we identified a fact witness we believe it would be important for the committee to interview, and we'll discuss that with you. But I think you lay out a compromise that should help us reach an agreement. If we're going to have witnesses that are pertinent to the investigation, give us facts that we want to know about. Just as we share documents, we should interview those witnesses together.
And if the gentleman would yield on his time, I would just say, as he knows real well, I'm not the chairman of the full committee, so I'm speaking as the chairman of the subcommittee, but I will have to run this all through Chairman Upton.
Well, I will certainly have to run it through my subcommittee ranker. Mr. Barrow will certainly be involved in that because he's sitting in the chair of the ranker. My last point is, I thought it said we had identified. The point was, if we identify, we'll share it with you, and we think we should work together in interviewing them. And I hope the full committee chairman shares the position that you put out and that I suggested affirmatively in response to.
Gentleman yielding back his time. Gentleman yields back his time. Now we'll welcome our colleagues. If it's okay with my colleagues, we'll start from the left and go to the right. We'll go ladies first. Maybe not politically correct, but with that, we'd like to recognize the Honorable Shelley Berkeley from the great state of Nevada. And you recognize for 5 minutes. Your full statement can be submitted into the record. And so the time's yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman Shimkus, Ranking Member Barrow, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. Let's get right to the point. Nevadans have been saying no to Yucca Mountain for decades, and we will continue shouting no at the top of our lungs until this effort to shove nuclear waste down our throats is ended. I don't know who you met with, but I can tell you the latest polls show that 77% of the people of the state of Nevada don't want nuclear waste stored at Yucca Mountain. Why? Because we don't want our home turned into a nuclear garbage dump, and we oppose more wasteful spending on a $100 billion dinosaur in the Nevada desert that should have gone extinct years ago. I know members of this committee will hear today from others who will say that Nevada's efforts to stop the dump is all political and has nothing to do with science. Hogwash. The truth is that Nevada's opposition has always been based on the danger that Yucca Mountain poses to our state and our nation. And Nevada's resolve only hardened in the face of renewed efforts to force us to accept this fatally flawed dump given the true risk it represents. Make no mistake, the Yucca Mountain Project was born of politics, starting with the infamous 1987 Screw Nevada bill. And why was it politics? Because the state of Nevada had a very small delegation at that time, and we were unable to protect the state from the 49 others. You want to talk about science? There's no radiation standards that currently exist because there's no way to create radiation standards to protect the public from a nuclear waste with a 300,000-year half shelf life. There's a GAO report that shows thousands of emails that make a mockery of so-called scientific studies. I'd be glad to present those to you as well. Originally, they were going to store nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain. Then they realized there were groundwater problems, so we were going to store it in containers with a titanium shield to protect it from the dripping water. Then they realized that wasn't enough because the titanium shields were going to erode. So then they were going to build concrete bunkers to contain the titanium shields that contained the canisters. And then the last Secretary of Energy in the Bush administration actually said he was going to create an army of robots that were going to go down to Yucca Mountain because man can't go down there, and to be able to protect us from the nuclear waste leakage. This legislation, the Screw Nevada bill, did away with any pretense of science, but it eliminated every other site under consideration as a dump location. At the same time, the nuclear industry and its allies have worked for years to silence Nevada's criticism and to minimize the fact that the proposed dump is located smack in the middle of an active earthquake zone. This is an area that has been rocked by violent earthquakes in the recent past, and we know the risks it creates. Proponents of the dump have also sought to dismiss scientific findings showing that water will enter Yucca Mountain, causing rapid corrosion of waste canisters and resulting in release of dangerous radioactive materials. And dump backers have worked tirelessly to downplay the risk to millions of Americans living along the transportation routes from decades of waste shipments barreling down our nation's roads and railways, with each canister a potential terrorist target or accident waiting to happen. Whether caused by human error, mechanical failure, or a deliberate 9/11 style strike, a massive release of these deadly materials threatens to kill or injure Americans, to release radioactive contamination, and to shut down major portions of our interstate highway system and rail system. When it comes to plans for Yucca Mountain, the fact remains that you could never eliminate the risk that will accompany shipping nuclear waste across more than 40 states through communities utterly unprepared to deal with radioactive contamination. We're talking about shipments passing homes, hospitals, schools every single day for 4 decades. And even more incredible, at the end of those 40 years, there will even be more waste in the cooling ponds than there were when the shipments began. And that's because as long as a plant is operating, some amount of nuclear waste will always remain at the nuclear facility. And that is why the threat posed by Yucca Mountain must be weighed against the availability of dry cask storage as an affordable solution to this problem, and it's available today. Using this method, we can secure waste at existing sites in hardened containers where they can remain for the next 100 years until we figure out what to do with this garbage. The nuclear industry is already utilizing dry cask storage at various locations around the U.S. There's no reason we should not require plants to begin moving waste right now from cooling pools into hardened containers. This would also give our nation time to find a true solution to addressing the nuclear waste issue that does not involve dumping $100 billion down a hole in the middle of the Nevada desert, particularly at a time that we can ill afford it. Surely we can do better than a dump plan that's incredibly dangerous, decades behind schedule, and whose budget has ballooned with every passing year to a staggering sum even by Washington standards. At the end of the day, the cost to build and operate Yucca Mountain will exceed the amount it would cost to settle lawsuits by plant operators seeking payment for the cost of moving waste into dry casts. It's also extremely important to remember that moving ahead on Yucca Mountain won't mean savings for families in nuclear states. Instead, they will continue paying the Yucca Mountain tax that is slapped on power bills each and every month. At a time when our nation is debating spending cuts, I am truly amazed that those that favor Yucca Mountain continue to demand that we open the floodgates and let tens of billions of dollars in additional spending come pouring out. The good news is that we do not have to go down this fiscally irresponsible path. Earlier this year, Congress passed a package that fully eliminates funding for Yucca Mountain project. The time has come to let this boondoggle die and to permanently end efforts to breathe life back into a program that's too dangerous and too costly for our nation. If you give me 30 seconds. In conclusion, Nevada remains, in case you don't already know, opposed to more wasteful spending on a failed $100 billion project that threatens lives, the environment, and the economy of my community and others across the nation. I will lay my body down on those railroad tracks to prevent any train that has nuclear waste in it from going to Yucca Mountain. I make that pledge to you and the people I represent. Nuclear waste can remain on existing sites and dry cast storage for the next century, giving us time to find an actual solution to replace the failed Yucca Mountain project. And if anybody watched what was happening in Japan and still has the audacity to suggest this for the people of our country, shame on us all. And Germany just announced that they were ending their nuclear program because they have no way to safely store nuclear waste. If Germany can figure that out, by gosh, the United States of America should be able to figure that out too. I yield back the balance of my time.
It's a good thing I got a great relationship with the trucking industry. So, but thank you, and obviously all members will have as much time as they need for their statements. We do appreciate your time, and we do appreciate your passion, and we've been opponents on this issue for many, many years. So,
yes, I'm hoping to bring you on to the light side of this issue.
I think I am. So, now I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Interior Committee, Doc Hastings, for as much time as you make, soon around 5 minutes. And welcome back to Washington, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to go second. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify regarding the importance of Yucca Mountain project to my district and to the nation as a whole, and my concerns regarding the Department of Energy's action to illegally dismantle this program. First and foremost, there should be no disputing that Yucca Mountain is a national repository for high-level defense waste and commercial spent nuclear fuel. Congress has voted to reaffirm this decision several times. Billions of dollars and many years have been spent studying what to do with nuclear waste, and Yucca Mountain was determined to be the answer. It is the law, period. Now, some may disagree with the law, but it is the law. For more than 16 months, the Obama administration, acting through the Department of Energy, has acted outside the scope of the law in order to pursue a purely political-driven mission to shut down the Yucca Mountain project. Time and time again, DOE has been asked to provide technical, scientific evidence to justify their reasons to withdraw the license application for Yucca Mountain. They have been unable to provide any reason, only stating that Yucca Mountain is no longer, quote, workable, end quote. What is truly not workable is the uncertainty that faces our commercial nuclear power industry as they look to a future that may require them to house spent nuclear fuel on a site for decades because there is no geological repository ready to accept it. The same is true for the communities across the nation that are hard at work cleaning up the high-level defense waste that is a legacy of our country's nuclear weapons production program. Commercial spent fuel and high-level defense waste are to be stored alongside each other at Yucca Mountain, and it makes sense to talk about them together. The state of Washington, the state of South Carolina, and leaders in my hometown community have filed a lawsuit challenging the Department of Energy's ability to withdraw the Yucca Mountain license application. Yet the administration continues to rush to terminate the project before the courts rule or before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's vote is released on this matter. In addition, the GAO recently released a report that determined that the decision to dismantle the Yucca Mountain project was political and not based on sound science. My district in central Washington is home to the Hanford nuclear site, part of the top-secret Manhattan Project that developed and constructed the first atomic bomb. The work done at Hanford helped win World War II and later provided the nuclear deterrence that helped defeat communism and end the Cold War. Today, Hanford is the world's largest environmental cleanup project, and the high-level defense nuclear waste at Hanford is slated to be shipped to the National Repository at Yucca Mountain. Right now, the Department of Energy is building a critical $12 billion plant that will treat 53 million gallons of high-level defense waste currently stored in underground tanks at Hanford and turn it into safe, stable glass logs that are scheduled to be stored at Yucca Mountain. The waste treatment plant, which is the $12 billion plant, which is over halfway done, is being built to meet specifications designed to match the geological structure and makeup of Yucca Mountain. The Department of Energy is requesting increased funds to reduce the risk and complete the waste treatment plants sooner than the expected 2016 timeframe. Changing the goalposts at halftime will unnecessarily add risk to the project and has the potential to waste limited cleanup dollars that are already difficult to secure. The waste treatment plant must move forward, but that requires more than proper funding. It requires Yucca Mountain. And I have an article that I'd like to submit for the record detailing this, if I may, Mr. Chairman, an article on this issue.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Thank you. I'll submit that. Delaying or abandoning Yucca Mountain means that Hanford will be home to high-level defense waste even longer. The federal government's legal commitment to our state won't be kept, and cleanup progress at Hanford will be jeopardized. With more defense waste slated to go to Yucca Mountain than any other state in the Union, the stakes for my state of Washington cannot be higher, and the risks could be not more real. In addition, Richland, which is just south of the Hanford project, is the home to the Pacific Northwest's only commercial nuclear power plant, the Columbia Generating Station. The spent nuclear fuel from this plant is also slated to go to Yucca Mountain. But without Yucca opening, the spent fuel will have to be kept on site for an unknown amount of time at great expense to the taxpayers and ratepayers. In my district, we understand that nuclear power is safe and that it provides good-paying jobs. But all of this is being jeopardized by the administration's decision to shut down Yucca Mountain. At a time of record debt, massive bailouts, and trillion-dollar deficits, our country cannot afford to waste billions of dollars going back to the drawing board on a national repository. It's time for the administration to follow the letter of the law, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, and to bring the Yucca Mountain project online and accept the shipments of the spent nuclear fuel and high-level defense waste. And I'd like to again thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and with that I yield back my time.
And thank you very much, Doc, for joining us. Now I'd like to recognize Appropriation Cardinal, Mr. Simpson from the great state of Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, let me just say for the record that I haven't been questioned by either the majority or the minority staff. So
I'm not sure you'd want to be.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committee on the Department of Energy, specifically on the Yucca Mountain decision. I've been in Congress now for 12 and a half years. For 8.5 years, I've served on the Appropriations Committee and the Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development, which funds the DOE, including the DOE's Nuclear Energy Division. In my short time in Congress, there have been 3 administrations, 4 or 5 secretaries of energy, and numerous nuclear energy administrators and undersecretaries. Each administration has its own priorities concerning the direction the department takes with respect to addressing the energy needs of our country, particularly nuclear energy. I lived through the IFR bubble, the GNEP bubble, the NGNP bubble, and the current SMR bubble. The most frustrating dilemma I've faced is this. After spending billions of dollars going into ever-changing directions, how do you sustain a program with a 20 to 30-year lifetime frame in an environment of ever-changing policies? What can we show the taxpayers for our investments? To make it clear, It's not a problem that I blame on the DOE. New administrations and secretaries are elected and appointed to enact their vision of the future. But it is a reality that the short-term nature of our political cycles does not lend itself to solving long-term problems. One of the ways we address this dilemma is by enacting statutes, passed by Congress and signed by the President. These statutes become the law of the land, binding on future Congresses and administrations. No administration or Congress can unilaterally decide the law doesn't apply to them. If the administration or Congress decides it doesn't like the current law, there are ways to change it, enact a new law. Absent that, the current law binds us all. One of the most glaring decisions by the administration to ignore this fundamental principle of law is the attempt to by the administration to unilaterally withdraw the license application for Yucca Mountain currently before the NRC and to mothball Yucca Mountain. Let me be perfectly clear here. We all know why this decision was made. It wasn't about science or the suitability of Yucca Mountain or even the need for a geological repository for high-level nuclear waste. It was a promise made during the heat of a presidential campaign. It was pure politics. We could spend days debating the suitability of Yucca Mountain as a geological waste repository, or the over 50 scientific studies that have been done on Yucca Mountain. We know more about this patch of Earth than probably any other patch of Earth in the world. We could talk about the $15 billion already spent on Yucca Mountain, the $9.5 billion collected from the utility consumers for the Nuclear Waste Fund, and whether that should be paid back to the consumers, as well as the $956 million paid out as a result of the 74 lawsuits resulting from the government's failure to receive spent fuel, or the GAO investigation, which included, quote, DOE's decision to terminate the Yucca Mountain repository program was made for policy reasons, not technical or safety reasons, unquote. Or the fact that this interpretation is supported by Volume 3 of the NRC's Safety Evaluation Report. But all of this really isn't the point. The point is the President is obligated to follow the law of the land as enacted by Congress and signed by a previous president. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act was amended in 1987 to designate Yucca Mountain as the repository for high-level nuclear waste, for whatever reason. I was not a member of Congress at the time, but that law passed, and Yucca Mountain became the law of the land. Following a veto by the governor of Nevada, the House voted to override the governor's veto by a 306 to 117 vote, and the Senate followed suit by a 60 to 36 vote. Yucca Mountain is still the law of the land. Congress has reaffirmed its position. In fact, I have with me here, and I won't ask to put them in the record because they're available, 34 recorded votes in just recent years assembled by the CRS in which Congress has reaffirmed its support for Yucca Mountain. I can't fault Secretary Chu or Secretary Lyons for pursuing this policy decision. After all, they work for the President, and he made this misguided decision to ignore the law. Based on these simple facts, the NRC Licensing Board reviewed the administration's request to withdraw the Yucca Mountain licensing application and denied that request nearly 1 year ago, June 29, 2010. The Commission reviewed and voted on the Licensing Board decision, but has yet to release its ruling nearly a year later. The NRC is supposed to serve as an independent watchdog, which is driven by science, not politics. Unfortunately, the chairman of the NRC has lost sight of its mission in order to effect a political outcome that has eroded the reputation of the NRC at a time when the public confidence is needed most, and he should be replaced. Again, I repeat, the issue of citing the nation's nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain is a matter of law, not politics. It serves as the clearest example of an ever-changing policy which is costing the taxpayers of billions of dollars and diminishing our ability to advance a long-term energy policy for our country. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting us here today.
I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Simpson, and my colleagues for joining us. It's a tradition of this committee not to follow up with questions, but to move. We have 2 more panels that we have to meet with, and so we want to thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the floor for votes. So without objection, the vote totals that Mr. Simpson had mentioned will allow into the record. Having no objections, so ordered. And I'd like to place the first panel, Mr. Gaffigan, Mr. Friedman, and Mr. Lyons. And So we want to thank you for joining us. We'll do as per the previous panel. We'll start from my left, your right, and go. Each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes. Your full statement can be submitted for the record. And to begin with, I'd like to ask Mr. Mark Gaffigan, Managing Director of Natural Resources and Environment for the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Thank you for your attendance, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss with you Yucca Mountain and U.S.
Can you hold for a minute?
You got that now? There we go. Okay. Anyway, I'm still pleased to be here. First of all, I want to summarize my remarks in 3 areas. Basically, the current status of Yucca Mountain and the nation's nuclear waste policy, the nuclear waste policy alternatives that have been discussed, and lastly, sort of lessons learned from past experience that may help inform our future as we go forward. First, the nation's policy for nuclear waste disposal is in dispute, creating great uncertainty about its future direction. In 1957, the National Academies of Science first endorsed nuclear waste disposal in a geological repository as the means for permanently disposing of nuclear waste. However, achieving a permanent policy leading to an acceptable repository has proven to be both costly and difficult. Under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act from the 1980s, the federal government made a commitment to take the nation's nuclear waste, and DOE has been investigating Yucca Mountain as a permanent repository, culminating in a license application to the NRC in 2008. However, after decades of work and expenditures of about $15 billion in today's dollars, DOE is now seeking to withdraw its application. DOE has not cited any technical or safety issues, but has stated that Yucca Mountain is not a workable option, in large part because of the lack of public acceptance by the people of Nevada. This decision is being challenged both in the courts and by an NRC board ruling that the Nuclear Waste Policy Act requires DOE to continue with the application. While these matters remain unresolved, DOE has proceeded to terminate Yucca Mountain in a definitive manner that will make it more difficult to reprise should they be compelled to do so. In lieu of pursuing Yucca Mountain, DOE established a Blue Ribbon Commission to consider alternative waste disposal strategies. Based on past work, we've identified 3 categories of alternatives. The first alternative is keeping the waste on site at about 80 different sites, both commercial and defense sites in the U.S. This is the path of least resistance option, since it is our current de facto policy for disposal. However, it does not address the commitment of the U.S. government to take possession of the waste. As has been pointed out, taxpayers have already paid nearly $1 billion in legal judgments because of the government's inability to meet its obligations. Estimates are that another $15 billion will be paid out by 2020, with a bill estimated to be another $500 million per year after that, again, coming from the taxpayers through the Department of Justice's Judgment Fund. Also, with continued on-site storage, DOE may not be able to meet commitments to states to remove defense-related waste. This could have negative impacts, such as jeopardizing Navy shipments of spent fuel and the refueling of Navy warships. A second general alternative is centralized interim storage. While this may offer some relief from on-site storage, such a facility faces the same siting challenges, and DOE states it does not have the authority to implement such a facility. Finally, the third option remains a geological repository, the goal of the Yucca Mountain project. Despite the promise of future technology that may reduce the demands on a geological repository, the best thinking of experts today is that no matter what, there will be some amount of waste in need of permanent disposal, and that a geological repository is the only feasible option for permanently disposing of nuclear waste. Lastly, I'd like to address lessons learned that might be instructive for future nuclear waste policy. DOE's recent policy decision to terminate Yucca Mountain due to a lack of public acceptance has been criticized because it was not based on any technical or safety reasons. However, if we are to learn anything from the nation's struggle to implement nuclear waste policy, it is the lesson that public acceptance is just as important a consideration as any technical or safety issues. Transparency economic incentives, and education are important tools in achieving public acceptance of any future nuclear waste policy. A second broad lesson is that consistent policy, funding, and leadership will be crucial in successful nuclear waste management. Many stakeholders have suggested that an independent organization, not subject to political changes, with a predictable funding stream may be best suited to carry out this policy. In closing, let me emphasize that any nuclear waste policy option, whether it be continued on-site storage, centralized interim storage, or a move to a permanent repository, will offer benefits but face serious costs and challenges. With the current uncertainty in the nation's nuclear waste policy direction and potential competing directions of that policy, those costs and challenges only increase with little additional benefit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my opening statement. I have submitted a formal statement for the record, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Gregory Friedman, Inspector General at the Department of Energy. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rather than repeat many of the statistical points and data that has been provided already, let me abbreviate my already abbreviated statement, which contains a synopsis of the work that we've done in Yucca Mountain over time, and it's more expanded in my full statement, which I hope will be submitted for the record. Getting down to the nub of the matter, our work to date has highlighted a number of issues that require the continued attention of Department management. For example, as has been mentioned, delays in the opening of Yucca Mountain have, as demonstrated by a number of financial and performance reviews, increase the ultimate cost of disposal of waste intended for Yucca Mountain. Closure of the project could significantly impact the Department's future environmental remediation liability, currently estimated to be $250 billion. We will further evaluate the impact of the closure as part of the ongoing financial work that we do at the Department of Energy. Further, unless a repository or other alternative strategy becomes available in the near term, the Department may miss a number of deadlines which are part of tri-party settlement agreements. As a result, the Department may be subject to significant assessments due to missed deadlines. As of September 30th, 2010, more than $800 million had been expended from the Treasury's Judgment Fund for payments to commercial nuclear waste producers for delayed acceptance of nuclear waste. In addition, the Department has estimated its contingent liability for spent nuclear fuel litigation to be approximately $15.4 billion. In summary, in our judgment, the need to develop a viable, effective, and acceptable path forward for nuclear waste disposal becomes more pressing day by day. The United States has announced plans to dismantle a significant part of its nuclear weapons stockpile with the unavoidable reality of increasing the volume of defense nuclear waste. Further, commercial nuclear waste, which was to represent 90% of the high-level waste stored at Yucca Mountain, continues to be generated at nuclear power facilities across the nation. To paraphrase one draft recommendation from the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, which was established by Secretary of Energy at the request of the President in January 2010, the United States should proceed expeditiously to develop an integrated, comprehensive plan for managing the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you or the committee or the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. And last but not least on the first panel is Dr. Peter Lyons, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the Department of Energy. Sir, welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. By way of introduction, I grew up in Nevada. I worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory with frequent assignments at the Nevada test site. When I led the lab's energy and environmental programs, all work on Yucca Mountain and reprocessing of used fuel reported to me. More recently, I visited the tunnel complex many times while working for Senator Pete Domenici and as an NRC commissioner. I've devoted 42 years of public service to the nation's needs for and uses of nuclear technology. I am convinced that nuclear energy must remain a part of our nation's clean energy portfolio. An acceptable solution to the nation's management of used nuclear fuel and high-level defense waste is a prerequisite for nuclear power to play this role. Secretary Chu has emphasized that a successful management strategy for used fuel must be founded on strong technical criteria and public acceptance. The GAO made the similar observation that overcoming social and political opposition is crucial. For example, there are successful repository programs in Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, and France, where public involvement and consultation are heavily emphasized. Our own experience with the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIP, illustrates our success with achieving social and political acceptance for a permanent waste repository and stands in stark contrast to the Yucca Mountain project. As the Secretary has stated, it is time to move beyond the 25-year-old stalemate over Yucca Mountain. I agree, and I accepted this position with full support for the administration's position. Let me turn to two interrelated statements made in the GAO report with which the department has very serious concerns. First, the GAO presumes that Yucca Mountain Repository would have opened on a date certain. And second, GAO presumes that any alternative would take longer than the Yucca Mountain Repository to implement. The GAO report uses 2020 for operations as a firm date and expresses concern that the department did not provide GAO with a more precise date. Yet the department has consistently stated that the 2020 date was subject to a number of contingencies over which the department has no control. Thus, there was always considerable uncertainty about when or whether the Yucca Mountain Repository would open. Among other things, that opening would require new legislation for land withdrawal, a second NRC license, presuming the first one were issued, and a new 300-mile railroad, and many related actions hinging on availability of state-issued permits. All of these would have faced persistent opposition from the state of Nevada. In shutting down the Yucca Mountain project, DOE is committed to building better, more workable alternatives. In fact, as the GAO report notes, if a more widely accepted alternative is identified, it carries the potential for avoiding costly delays experienced by the Yucca Mountain Repository Program. That is a point that Secretary Chu has emphasized. Thus, the department disagrees with the GAO statement that the proposed termination of Yucca Mountain, which had been planned to be opened in 2020, will likely prolong storage at reactor sites, which would increase on-site storage costs. There's simply no basis to assume that the termination of Yucca Mountain will prolong this process. There may be other alternatives that can be put in place sooner than Yucca Mountain might have opened. I'd also like to highlight another statement in the report to which the department takes exception, namely that a final impact of terminating Yucca Mountain is that communities may be even less willing to host nuclear fuel repositories or other storage sites in the future due to further erosion of DOE's credibility. Quite to the contrary, a new start, with Secretary Chu's emphasis on public acceptance, I believe can lead to enhanced credibility of the department. And as further proof, the department's leadership of the WIP program enjoys very strong support from the local community. In conclusion, the department is acting responsibly in terminating the Yucca Mountain project. We can and we should do better than the Yucca Mountain project. Working together, the administration and the Congress can seize an opportunity to craft a new option with a higher certainty of success. I personally look forward to the chance to put a successful used nuclear fuel management program into practice that will serve future generations and, above all, enable them to enjoy the benefits of clean, safe nuclear power. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Lyons, and I would encourage the first panel to stick around for the second panel because you'll have some local folks from the state of Nevada who probably already have some acceptance of this position. I'd like to begin my first round of questioning with recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to start with Mr. Gaffigan. How much has been expended on Yucca Mountain development? How much money have we spent?
About $15 billion in today's dollars.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going quick. So, and
Yeah.
where did that money come from?
About 10 from the Nuclear Waste Fund and another $5 billion from appropriations.
And how does the Nuclear Waste Fund get its money?
It's a tax on the ratepayers, pay 1/10 of a cent.
Which ratepayers? Just those that
those who benefit from nuclear power.
Of the money from ratepayers, are those fees still being collected?
Absolutely.
Of the taxpayers' funds, what happens to taxpayer spending if Yucca Mountain is terminated?
The taxpayer spending continues. Current estimates are $15 billion through 2020.
And that you thought about my next question. So, and what happens to this liability for each year a repository is not accepting waste past 2020?
Current estimates are $500 million per year. Those are DOE's estimates.
And what other costs might the taxpayer face if this nuclear waste issue is delayed?
There'll be costs associated with the judgments. There's about 72 lawsuits currently brought, and about 6 have settled. So there'll be Department of Justice costs involved with it. There'll be costs associated with the waste on the defense side in terms of perhaps more storage needed at these various defense facilities because Yucca Mountain's not available or some other repository.
Great, thank you. Dr. Lyons, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act is the law that governs nuclear waste and spent fuel disposal policy, is it not? That is the current law. And the law says that the Department of Energy must study, characterize for suitability, and develop a repository at Yucca Mountain, correct?
That is correct.
That's what the law says. The law says further that DOE shall file an application for a license to construct the repository, correct?
Yes, sir.
The law also established the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management and a director for that office, correct?
Yes.
The law actually makes clear DOE's, and I want it for the record, for the transcript, all these questions have been responded affirmatively by Dr. Lyons. The law actually makes clear DOE's duties and obligations in the development of Yucca Mountain. And those obligations presently are to support the application pending before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, correct? I'm talking about the law.
As you know, sir,
I'm talking about the law, so you be very, very careful how you answer this. What does the law say?
That is what the law says.
Thank you very much.
General Counsel
now I'll go to the next question. What provision of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, what provision of the law is the Secretary relying on to withdraw the application of the law?
I am not a lawyer, sir. Our General Counsel has reviewed that and believes that the Secretary has the authority to withdraw the application.
I think you might need to get with your General Counsel. And you better be very careful in answering these questions. I'm out of time. I'm not out of time, but I've finished my questions. I'll now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being late. But I know we finished opening statement. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to place an opening statement into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'd also like to ask unanimous consent to place into the record a letter from the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, and also from the chair of the Board of County Commissioners of Clark County, Nevada.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank our panel for being here. I think most of you know that a number of us did a congressional trip to Yucca Mountain last month, and I appreciate the opportunity to view up close what's the decisions or what's been going on since the 80s. And I appreciate the opportunity the folks from the local county to express their concern or their interest in reopening Yucca Mountain from the decision. While on that trip, I heard various reports on the actual cost of building Yucca Mountain, and I know testimony, Mr. Gaffney, was $14 billion.
We put it all in today's dollars, about $15.4 billion.
Okay. Is there any of that that could be recouped if we decided to, forget about it and look for another long-term facility?
That money is spent.
Okay. Any other opinion from any other witnesses on the panel?
Well, Mr. Green, we pointed out in our lessons learned report that the retention of the intellectual property derived as a result of the expenditures associated with Yucca Mountain is an extremely important focus of the department, should be an important focus of the department. So hopefully, if the decision is made to sustain to terminate the site, there will be a tremendous body of knowledge that will be useful going forward. That's certainly our anticipation and our hope.
I would agree with Mr. Friedman.
Do each of you agree that we should have some long-term storage facility?
I would say that the National Academies of Science back to 1957 has said we're going to need some form of permanent repository, no matter And that's the current thinking today. Even if we go to some new technologies, there will be some waste, and we will need to dispose of it in a permanent solution.
I would agree with Mr. Gaffigan's comments, Mr. Green.
I would also agree, and the Blue Ribbon Commission recently in their draft recommendations so stated as well.
Well, I guess I have some concern because I know the only other alternative is along the Texas border in New Mexico, and we could just be opening another can of worms if we started out there. Obviously, in Nevada, nobody runs for office out there saying they support Yucca Mountain. I don't know if anybody would run for office in New Mexico if they would say they want to support a high-level nuclear storage facility in New Mexico. That's one of my concerns about it, that we need one, and we spent $15.4 billion, and now in the last year and a half, the decision's been made to literally put a fence across it and shut it down. How long would it take us if we started anew right now? Would it take us, because did Yucca Mountain actually start in 1982, the discussion of it, or the decision on the site, or the pathway to get to the decision?
I think it was early on, it was one of 9 sites that was considered, and eventually that was winnowed down to about 3 sites by 1987, and then in the 1987 amendment directed that only Yucca Mountain be considered. Okay. So it's fair to say at least.
When did the decision-making start?
It's fair to say we've been at this since the mid-1980s. I don't know if Dr. Lyons would like to elaborate on that.
No, I would agree that there was some characterization work probably started even before 1982.
So we're talking about 25 years to where we are now. And do you think if we decided to do something, we would take another 25 years to get there?
I think it's important to note, sir, that as the Blue Ribbon Commission works through this process and evaluates successful models from both within the country, WIP, and in the international community, that there may well be approaches to the management as well as the selection that will be suggested by the BRC that can lead to a much more expeditious movement on this.
The gentleman yield on that real quick.
I'd be glad to yield.
Dr. Lyons, is it true that the Blue Ribbon Commission was given a mandate not to consider Yucca Mountain?
The Blue Ribbon Commission is not a siting commission. They're not considering anything.
But they were given a mandate not to even consider Yucca Mountain.
They're simply not a siting commission, sir.
So that's a yes?
They're not a siting commission. That is the statement I would make, sir.
So nothing, interim storage, nothing would be considered with Yucca Mountain? If they're doing centralized regional storage sites, Yucca Mountain could not be considered?
I didn't say that. I simply said they're not a siting committee. They're not evaluating
It's
sites.
my understanding that the Blue Ribbon Commission was given explicit directions not to consider Yucca Mountain.
It's my understanding
Would
that
you
they're
dispute
simply
that?
not a siting committee. They're not considering sites.
You'll bet.
Well, and my concern is that, and it's more of a statement than a question, is that we have all over the country in sites, 2 of them in Texas, where we're actually storing them on site. And we would hope that we would have some long-term permanent storage. I support recycling so we don't have to put as much there, but that's not available in our country. But that's my concern, is that by starting over a year and a half ago, then it could be 25 years, maybe longer, we would hope. But even that, we're looking at 10 years away. And a lot of our sites, temporary storage sites, were not designed to be the long term that they are now. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Gentlemen.
If I may, Mr. Green, the Blue Ribbon Commission may recommend, since I certainly can't speak for what their final recommendations will be, may recommend other paths, such as interim storage, that could lead us to at least useful options far sooner than a repository could be in operation.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair recognizes the Vice Chairman of the Committee, Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are the current sites at nuclear power plants and other facilities above and below ground in concrete containers, et cetera, suitable for safety?
Yes, Mr. Murphy. That is reviewed on a regular basis by the Nuclear
Regulatory Commission.
They're adequate for how long?
Excuse me? They're adequate for how long? I believe I've read some studies where some are good for 30 years or so.
The waste confidence decision recently reached by the NRC
give me a number. 30
was
years.
30 years after the cessation of operations at the site. We have research programs.
I just got to keep going. To say it's taken us 30 years to get this far. Does DOE maintain a record of the balance of the nuclear waste fund?
I'm sure they do, sir, but
You know how it's broken down by source or anything?
I don't have those numbers, but I would assume it's available. I don't know.
Get us that information?
We will provide that for the record.
Well, I'd also like to know if the DOE is continuing to maintain that record, if it's available for the public, at least to the state PUCs, and make sure it's updated. And I'd like to know if we can have that information. That'd be helpful.
Well, the number's around $25 billion. I'm not positive of the exact number.
That's correct.
We'd like to know how the fund is broken down.
And it can be provided broken down.
Thank you. Given that it's taken us about 30 years to get this far, what makes you think you can suddenly complete this with a deus ex machina or something by 2020?
I didn't say we could do it by 2020. I said we may be able to do it sooner than Yucca Mountain could
There's absolutely no basis to assume the termination of Yucca Mountain will prolong the process, you said.
Again, I said that there's a significant question in my mind whether Yucca Mountain will open. As to how soon one can do it, an interim storage site probably could be done by 2020.
I'm trying to go by the law here, sir, and I hope you are too. But the law that Congress passed, signed by President, has been gone through multiple administration here, says that this is the site, this is what's selected. So I have to ask, is there something unsuitable scientifically about the Yucca Mountain site?
The license application submitted by the Department of Energy
is it
based
unsuitable,
on the
yes or
technical
no?
criteria.
Unsuitable, yes or no? Scientifically based, is it unsuitable, yes or no?
The license application was based on the technical criteria.
Is it unsuitable, yes or no?
It's in the DOE's judgment on their application, it met
You stated that
criteria.
DOE noted that overcoming social and political opposition is crucial, and so we're in the midst of the social and political opposition, I'm assuming. I'm trying to find out if it's scientifically credible or not. Did DOE mess this all up over the last 30 years? Do we not trust anything you do and basically say that all the work that DOE has done the last 30 years on deciding that Yucca Mountain is suitable or not, is that scientific garbage or is it scientifically credible, yes or no?
As I indicated, sir, the license application was based on the technical criteria.
So what does that mean? Is it suitable or not? Is it scientifically suitable or not? This is really not hard to do, sir. Is it a yes or no? There's only two words you get to say, yes or no.
In the judgment of DOE, yes. They don't have the final answer.
That's important. So given that this is suitable, I have to find out this thing. Now, you mentioned some legal counsel before in relation to Mr. Shimkus' question. I'd like you to provide to this committee all communications regarding the judgment from legal counsel, Department of Energy, saying that they don't have to comply with the law, oral, written, email, anything. It's important that we have an opportunity to. Will you provide that for us?
The department's provided about 40,000 pages already. We're continuing to try to provide what you need.
It's important we have this really parsed out so we understand when someone receives legal advice not to comply with the law. I'd really like to have that there, not just say here's 40,000 pages. Hope you can do that. Back to the question here with regard to because now the DOE has ruled that the site was suitable back in 2002, and you just confirmed it. A reversal is going to require new physical evidence that the criteria of suitability are not met. And then DOE would have to follow several explicit steps laid out in the statute, in the law, instead of just walking away. Do you have that physical evidence that this site is no longer suitable?
Again, sir, as was pointed out in my testimony and by other speakers already, Secretary Chu has made the statement that a workable solution is technical criteria and public acceptance.
I'm asking the facts. What we don't get to do is to say we get to selectively enforce laws based upon that the polls change or we need votes in states. I'm asking you from a scientific, because this is where DOE either is credible as an organization or it lacks credibility. I really want it to be a credible organization. I have highest respect for many of the scientists in there. And this is an opportunity to either be a scientist or go by polling and politics. Is there been some physical evidence that says the site is no longer suitable, which therefore says your compliance with the law by saying we don't have to do Yucca Mountain anymore? Is there some scientific evidence out there that says it is not suitable?
As I stated, the license application was based on technical criteria. Based on general counsel, the Secretary's view is that we do have the authority to withdraw.
I didn't ask you if you had the authority. I'm not sure I'm getting here with Mr. Chairman, but I hope you would provide that information to us, because that is the crux of what we're doing today.
We'll continue to provide information as best we can.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A moment ago, when we were going over the subject of the cost that's been invested in the program so far, there was an attempt to explain some of the value we've recouped from this, the knowledge, the information, the lessons learned. What I'd remind you is that the more you spend on something of doubtful authenticity, the more likely you are to think you got the real deal. If you spent $5 million on a pen and ink sketching that's reported to be a Leonardo da Vinci, you're very likely to believe it's the real deal. If you paid $5 for it, you know it's a fake. What the point I want to emphasize is there's a vast difference between the value of a lesson learned and the cost of a lesson learned. And I'm not exactly sure we have a good understanding of the difference between what the magnitude of the difference is in this particular case. I want to get on to, I want to try and see where we go from here, though. I want to change the subject just a little bit. I have been present when Secretary Chu has summed up the cost to the American consumer of the fact that we were a nuclear pioneer country in this world. And we went down a bunch of different paths and got different designs for different reactors here and there. It's part of the price, part of the legacy cost of being the pioneer, or going first and actually developing all kinds of different ideas. He was talking to one of his colleagues in France, and his French colleague says, it's very simple what the problem is, you Americans. You got 80 different reactors and one cheese. We got 80 different cheeses and one reactor. It's a good lesson to learn. We got 80 different waste repositories in this country, whether we know it or not, and whether we like it or not. And we got a whole array of approaches toward dealing with the problem for the foreseeable future. Some of these are wet storage, dry storage. Some are a lot more stable. Some are a lot more safe than others. Meanwhile, the American consumer has been paying for this long-term waste repository program that's stopped dead in its tracks right now. 2/3 of the cost has just been paid by ratepayers, whether they know it or not, and whether they like it or not, and whether they support it or not. Another third of this has been paid by the general fund, by taxpayers chipping in their income taxes to run the government. All the money that's been paid in so far, I gather, has been spent, but the money's still coming in. One question I have, and maybe this is addressed in part to the Blue Ribbon Commission, but I want to address it to y'all, is what can we do to divert that income stream to provide some stability, some predictability, and some safety in the meantime for all those utilities that are running and operating these plants now and trying to operate these 70 waste repositories on site that we've got right now. For example, if the money they're forced to extract from customers in the form of an excise tax on the rates they're paying can be diverted back to those utilities on the condition to be used to take wet storage and turn it into dry storage, something that is inherently unstable and likely to get loose, into something that's very stable, an asset that would not be stranded, something that would have lasting value no matter what we're going to do in terms of a long-term repository. Wouldn't that be a useful thing to do in the meantime? Has anybody got any suggestion along those lines of what we can do with the current mess we're in?
I would say there's a couple hurdles. Under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the money's being collected for a long-term repository. We talk about maybe using it for a centralized repository. DOE is saying they don't have the authority to use that fund for that, so there would have to be some change in law for that. In the meantime, industry is saying if you're not going to pursue a long-term repository, stop collecting the money. DOE's proceeding to collect the money. In fact,
that also would require a law, wouldn't it?
And they're proceeding on a basis of a Yucca Mountain by 2020. That's how they base the rate. So, Mr. Lyons may have some doubt about the 2020 date, but it's still being used by DOE as the best alternative going forward.
If I may add to that.
Go ahead, Dr. Lyons.
The Department of Energy recognizes it has the responsibility for the long-term management of the used fuel. As that fuel is being generated at your plant Vogel, for example, whatever the future option is going to be, that still will require handling by the Department of Energy. That is the rationale for continuing to collect the fee. And there has been no rationale, at least demonstrated to date, to change that fee.
Well, here's my concern. I recognize y'all's need to set aside a little something in the future for the handling charges y'all are going to incur in the future, but you ain't got any idea as to when you're going to be handling nothing, and we're handling it right now. My ratepayers are handling it right now, and our customers are handling it right now. My question is, and the questioning has put a shine of light on a problem when you got a law that tells you what this policy is going to be. It's going to take 25 years to implement, and a lot of annual appropriations bills that have to get through both houses of Congress in order to implement. I mean, if we're going to have a change in the law to do anything positive, can we at least open the discussion and put on the table the idea of changes we can all agree on to try and manage the problem on site as long as it takes us to get our act together. Because what took an act of Congress to set us down this course and a plan that required subsequent Congresses to go along with it is going to require another act of Congress to fix. Let's have an interim strategy we can all agree on. Let's try and work together on that. That would be my suggestion. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania. And just for the record, they're supposed to call votes at 2:30. We'll try to get one or two more rounds of questioning before we go down to vote, but we'll have to adjourn because there's 3 votes in a row, and not everybody will be through, so we'll have to recess. So, gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gaffigan, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 created a federal legal obligation to accept nuclear fuel and dispose it in a geologic facility. Is that correct?
There was a commitment on the part of the nation, to the federal government, to take possession of the waste and explore a long-term repository.
So is it accurate to say, in light of this law, that Congress resolved how to manage spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste back in 1982?
There was a decision made by the Congress to pass the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. That's correct.
The development of the Act was not the development of a single Congress or some partisan maneuvering, was it?
No.
In point of fact, in 1982, when the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was enacted, there was a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and Democrats firmly controlled the House. In 1987, when Congress determined Yucca Mountain consistently the top of the top 3 sites was to be examined for a repository, there was a Republican president, and Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. In 2002, leadership of the Congress was reversed, but Congress overwhelmingly resolved to support Yucca development 306 to 117. So when the nation, through its elected representative, resolved how to solve the nuclear waste problem, it did so in a consistently bipartisan fashion. Wouldn't you agree?
Those were policy decisions passed by the Congress.
Dr. Lyons, the Department of Energy motion to withdraw the license application said, quote, the Secretary has decided that a geologic repository at Yucca Mountain is not a workable option for long-term disposition, end quote. Was the Secretary's decision based on internal department scientific evaluation by the administration?
As I indicated, the license application was based on the technical criteria, and the Secretary, in his evaluation, recognized the importance of technical criteria and social acceptance criteria.
Was it based on any scientific evidence that Yucca is not workable?
No, it was based on the concern that there are 2 major criteria, as I indicated.
Isn't there, in fact, ample scientific evidence that Yucca is workable and safe?
That would remain to be determined if this were to move through the process, sir. In the DOE's estimation, when they submitted the license, that was their determination.
Has the department determined that Yucca Mountain's repository is not suitable to meet the relevant safety standards for long-term storage of spent fuel and nuclear waste?
No, there is no data that has been presented along those lines. However, again, the decision has been made to withdraw, and whether that, and the legality of that is being tested both through the NRC and the courts.
In fact, DOE still stands behind the quality of its application that the repository can be built and protective of the public health for 10,000 years and more. Isn't that the case? Doesn't DOE, in fact, admit as much in its application to the NRC?
Those are the technical criteria and others that were deemed met by the Department of Energy.
So technically speaking, Yucca Mountain remains a workable option. Why is it not workable in DOE's view?
I don't know how else to say it, sir, other than that the Secretary, in his view, which I agree with, views both technical criteria and social acceptance criteria as key to ever moving ahead towards successfully opening a repository.
What scientific evaluations has DOE performed to make this determination?
I believe I just indicated that it was a question of social public acceptance.
So this is the opinion of the Secretary. Did DOE inform this opinion? Was anyone from the White House or the administration involved in this decision in any way?
That was before I was involved. I simply can't answer to that, sir. I know the Secretary certainly had the benefit of general counsel that it was within his rights to withdraw the application, and that is now in the courts and the NRC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Dingell, for 5 minutes.
This is to Mr. Gaffigan. We have here a splendid situation where the federal government has invested huge sums of money in a thing that we cannot use. We have taxed the daylights out of the ratepayers. And how much is that fund that we have taxed into the ratepayers?
Currently, the current balance is about $25 billion, and about
how much have we spent of that on what?
Almost $10 billion.
Almost 10.
And that's
we've spent.
Just to clarify, we spent about 10, plus there's another 25 sitting there.
So we've got a gigantic hole in the ground. Now, tell me that there is a lawsuit going on this matter, is there not?
There is, sir.
And the federal government is being sued, but because of the mercy and the charity of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit, it has never progressed to the point where it is going to lead to a judgment. Is that right?
There was some oral arguments taken in March of this year. The basic gist of those arguments was whether there was a final action of the government, whether NRC was going to rule. So that was the gist of the oral arguments. We haven't heard anything since.
I'm just a poor Polish lawyer from Detroit, but you've stated that DOE officials stated they held frequent meetings and focus groups to help guide the shutdown. Can you tell me what that means?
We had a hard time knowing what that means, so we asked.
Does DOE know what that means?
Well, I think they know what it means, but we asked them to sort of, could they at least document what they had in terms of a shutdown?
Explain it to you?
They said they had a draft plan. They were working on it. This is something the IG looked at.
Has that draft plan been submitted to anybody, Mr. Chairman?
I think
no, sir. The draft plan was not completed, and instead the department moved ahead as expeditiously as possible to shut down by the end of fiscal 10.
Could we get the draft plan? I think it'd be nice if you would share it with us. Would you submit it, please?
I honestly don't know if it's completed, sir. If it's available, yes, I don't know.
Submit the darn thing to the committee, and we'll tell you what we think of it. Now, in your testimony, Secretary Lyons, you said that DOE takes exception to a statement in the GAO report that a final impact of terminating Yucca Mountain is that communities may be even less willing to host spent nuclear fuel repositories or other storage sites in the future due to further erosion of DOE's credibility. You go on to say that, on the contrary, a new start could lead to enhancement of the credibility of the department's approach. I don't mean to make light of a difficult situation, but to your knowledge, have communities around the country been volunteering to host a nuclear waste repository?
Yes, sir. There have been communities that have corresponded with the department.
Who has volunteered to do this?
One I'm aware of is in New Mexico, around the Carlsbad area. There may be others. I don't know.
Is that for high energy waste?
Again, this is a local communities supporting. Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Friedman, how much is closing out the Yucca Mountain project costing the federal government?
The closeout
yearly basis, or
Mr. Dingell, I'm not sure of the answer to that question.
Would you please get it and submit it?
If I can, I certainly will.
It isn't going for peanuts, is it? It's costing lots of money, isn't it?
No. They've spent a great deal of money on the licensing support network and finalizing some of the technical studies that have been done.
Now, how much is it estimated that the closeout of Yucca will impact the Department of Energy's environmental remediation liability? Do you have any estimate on that?
We do. We expect that it will be.
Would you submit that and the answer to that for the record?
I certainly will.
Give it to me right now. Now, how much has the United States invested in the Yucca Mountain project? How much of that was from the Nuclear Waste Fund, i.e. the ratepayers, and how much from the federal government, i.e. the taxpayers?
It was about 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 from the rate fund, about $10 billion.
What does that come down to, Mr. Gaffigan?
Where is that? What?
How much does that come down to coming out of the skin of the ratepayers and taxpayers?
$10 billion from the ratepayers and about $5 billion from the taxpayers, and that doesn't include any of the judgment fund.
Now, you know, fellas, I know my questions seem repetitive, and everybody who comes up here from the department gets the same dose. Because we've all heard about how much spent nuclear fuel is stored at various sites around the country. And we just store the damn stuff. We don't process it the way the French do, but we dig holes that cost lots of money. And then we sit around and you guys come up and explain to us, and then after a little while later somebody else runs the committee, and then you come up and explain to us again, or your successors do. And so we've got a facility here that everybody wants to do something with. We've got a resource that we're not using. We're threatening nuclear, which is extremely important to this country and energy shortage and in all the other problems that we have. And it seems that we have no long-term plan for dealing with spent nuclear waste. And the best we can say is that you seem to be proceeding down a very dangerous path with more and more and more and more of this stuff piled up. And members of the Congress need to know what's going on. We need to protect the funds collected, and we need to have a long-term solution, either storage that will work or reprocessing. And when are you going to get to this? This question was going on when I was chairman of the committee. As a matter of fact, it was going on when I was a young member of this body. When is it that I can look forward to being young enough that I'm going to get an answer on these questions?
I think the best answer, sir, is that is the charge of the Blue Ribbon Commission. They will have their interim report in July of this year. I am looking forward to that report, and I, too, have been working many years to understand what the long-term solutions acceptable in this country will be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, time's expired. Just for notice to my colleagues, first a question. We have votes on the floor. We're going to finish with this with the Chairman Emeritus Barton for 5 minutes, and then we'll recess. The question to my colleagues is, what's your pleasure to ask the first panel to come back, because some of you have been waiting to address questions to them, or do we go to the second panel? Do you want the first panel?
I think you should let this panel come back because some of the members.
That is my question, and that's what I'm posing to my colleagues, and I think that we'll ask you to come back after votes to finish up. My colleagues are here. Chair recognizes Chairman Emeritus Barton for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I know that we've got a vote, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick. We had the Nuclear Waste Policy Act in 1982. It was amended in 1987. That's 29 and 24 years ago. Under that law, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy are authorized to find a permanent repository for the high-level nuclear waste, both from civilian and military applications in this country. Through a convoluted process, Yucca Mountain was chosen as the repository. It's been through innumerable hearings, studies, but back in 2008, a license application was tendered to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission by the Department of Energy. I think the law gives them 4 years to make a decision. They're with the change in the administration, the Obama administration last year asked to withdraw that application. The board empowered to make the decision whether the application should be withdrawn in a very unusual decision, chose not to allow it to be withdrawn, and now we've got a very convoluted process at the NRC where we're trying to determine whether there is a vote or isn't a vote, and we're in discussions on a bipartisan basis with the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission about that issue. The purpose of this hearing is to determine what the legal criteria is for the Department of Energy to terminate Yucca Mountain. And the distinguished Deputy Secretary or Undersecretary has said, if I heard him correctly, that decision was based on social public acceptance. Is that correct, Dr. Lyons?
Secretary Chu has testified many times, yes. He views both technical criteria and public acceptance.
Where in the NWPA does it say that social public acceptance is a criteria?
I didn't say it was in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. I said that is in the judgment of our Secretary.
Variable in the decision-making process.
Again, sir, our Secretary has the benefit of legal counsel, and this is in the courts and in the NRC, as you pointed out.
If the Secretary of Energy decided that the Yucca Mountain wasn't acceptable because it was in the desert, would that be a criteria? If he just decided he didn't like the color purple, would that be a criteria?
I think you know our Secretary, sir, and he'd have substantially stronger criteria.
I don't think social public acceptance is a criteria.
As I noted
Not in the law.
As I noted in my testimony, there are many, many actions that are still required if Yucca Mountain were ever to open. Many of those decisions require permits and concurrences from the state of Nevada.
But my understanding is that everybody at your level and above has to hold up your hand and take an oath of office or an oath to uphold the Constitution and defend the laws of the United States and all of this. We have a current public law that has not been amended that gives the Department of Energy the authority to tender an application. That application has been tendered. The Secretary decided to withdraw it, but the board responsible for accepting that withdrawal said no. So I would assume that the Secretary of Energy is knowingly and willfully violating federal law.
Well, as you're aware, sir, the day after the ASLB made that decision, then the Commission decided that they wished to take review. That is their prerogative as the Commission.
And we're in a I don't know, it's not a negotiation, but we're certainly in a situation where we're trying to determine with the chairman and the current members of the NRC just what they've decided or not decided to do, and that's a convoluted mess if I've ever seen one.
I certainly can't comment on what's going on at the NRC, but between the NRC and the courts, because this is also in the courts, the legality of that withdrawal is going to be determined eventually.
I've got 51 seconds. If this Congress affirmatively states that the application should continue to be reviewed and that Yucca Mountain should continue to be considered according to current law, is the Secretary of Energy and the President of the United States going to honor that law?
If we are ordered by one of those mechanisms that is not appealed to continue to resume the license, we've indicated repeatedly in testimony that yes, we can and will. However, as at least part of our thinking, Congress has not provided any appropriations in FY11.
I have a feeling we will before the end of this year do so. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and just to correct record, that's not true. We stopped funding for the last half of fiscal year 11 in the CR. The first part of the fiscal year was under a continuing resolution that still had it, and that's another issue of debate. Chair recognizes Mr. Inslee for as much time as he can consume before we have votes.
Thank you. This is very disturbing on a couple of bases. One is in my state, the state of Washington, we have people very diligently trying to follow their obligations legally and in their profession, getting this waste ready to ship to Yucca. They're going to be ready to ship 9,700 canisters to Yucca. They're doing their job, but the department's not doing its job. Now, that's on a local concern. But on a national concern, I just think this situation is one of a failed state. You know, they talk about failed states around the world. This, because of the failure to follow the clear law here, this is the equivalency of a failed state. We've reached a national decision. It is unpopular in one local part and a beautiful part of the country, as it will be in any part of the country that we ever have this decision made, and yet we can't execute a decision. Now, this sort of flagrant statement that social acceptance is now a legal criteria, I don't understand. I just asked Dr. Lyon, how are we ever to build anything like a nuclear waste repository anywhere in the United States if social acceptance is a mandatory criteria to build something?
I used the example in my testimony of the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico, which has the strongest local acceptance, and I noted that there are a number of international examples where, with careful education, with transparent processes, there has been strong acceptance of repository programs.
So why didn't you do the same thing in Nevada? I mean, is there
I also
something
indicated
unique?
in my
Are you saying there's something unique about Nevadians that make them unique in the United States, and this will be welcome as rosewater in the rest of the United States? I mean, this is a situation it's going to smell the same no matter what name we put on it. And this is just a failed policy looking for another social acceptance criteria failure around the United States. What evidence do you have that there's any more socially acceptable place for this particular situation?
I provided the example of the waste isolation pilot plant. That's a different repository, different type of repository, but it is a repository, and it has strong local acceptance.
And obviously in the decision-making of the department, based on the best science and geology and hydrology, we decided Nevada was the best place. But now you're telling me we're going to maybe look for a less scientifically credible, less geological stable, less hydrologically isolated place because we might get a little better social acceptance. That is a failed policy by a failed state. And I have to just tell you, regardless who the administration is, an abject failure to follow federal law here is most disturbing, and it's unacceptable. And I don't really want to think I want to belabor you with too many more questions. I just want to tell you it's unacceptable by any administration of any party to make a decision when we're dealing with this number of curies of radiation based on social acceptance is just not a winner for this country. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. The vote's being called right now. There's 3 votes. That's probably going to run around 30 minutes. We'll see who comes back, who hasn't asked questions the first panel, and if not, be prepared to answer questions. But having done this before, it may be it for you all, but you need to be here in case someone wants to ask you all a specific question. I'll recess this hearing subject to the call of the chair.
We'll go ahead and resume the hearing. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes for my opportunity to question. Thank you very much for being here today and your time to share with us. Just a couple of quick questions for you based on some previous testimony by Dr. Lyon. I had a great deal of discussion regarding social acceptance, the social acceptance theory, as it pertains to the Yucca Mountain license. Mr. Gaffigan, can you cite any statutory authority for social acceptance criteria?
Not in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act.
Mr. Friedman, can you cite social acceptance criteria in statute?
Not that I'm aware of.
Dr. Lyons, can you cite statutory authority for social acceptance?
I'm not citing statutory authority, sir, but what I have tried to indicate is the number of steps that would be required to ever open Yucca Mountain, steps that Nevada stands, I believe, in opposition to. And I believe they could very successfully block that.
So you would agree that there is no statutory authority or basis for social acceptance theories as criteria?
Not specifically in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act.
So the answer is no, then. There is no statutory authority for social acceptance?
No.
Okay. Thank you. And what is the theory of your legal counsel, then, when he believes that social acceptance is a valid criteria?
Our secretary's outlined that many times. The briefs that our general counsel has filed, either with the NRC or in the court cases, those are available. Your staff has them. That spells out the position of the general counsel. I certainly won't try to repeat it. I'm not a lawyer.
Thank you, Dr. Lyons. Mr. Friedman, as your role as Inspector General, what is that role in a nutshell?
Well, four responsibilities, Mr. Gardner. One is to act as an independent set of eyes and ears for the Secretary and for the Congress. Two is to bring to justice those who are attempting to defraud the people of the United States. Three is to be independent fact finders in high-profile controversial matters. And four is to give the U.S. taxpayers a seat at the table when important government decisions are made.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Mr. Friedman, do you believe that the social acceptance criteria is a valid theory?
Mr. Gardner, I don't exactly know how to answer that question, to be honest with you. You asked me whether I thought it was in statute, and I don't believe that it is per se, so I would have to say it's somewhat questionable from a legal standpoint, but I'm not a lawyer and I'm not making a legal judgment.
Mr. Friedman, in the four roles that you mentioned the Inspector General has under its purview, do you believe one of them is to expect or to perhaps visit with the Secretary's office about the social acceptance criteria that they are using, if you believe there is no statutory authority?
Well, we also have a responsibility under the IG statute, Mr. Gardner, not to overlap or duplicate what GAO has done. So I think it's fair to say that GAO's report, which has obviously been the major topic of this hearing, has really addressed that issue essentially.
Thank you. And further questions, Mr. Friedman. You've stated that it's likely that the termination of the Yucca project will significantly impact the department's environmental remediation liability, which is currently estimated at $250 billion in future cleanup costs. Have you seen any evaluation by the department regarding how its decisions will affect this liability?
No, what we're anticipating, I indicate in my long testimony, my complete testimony, that we'll be looking at this as the department prepares its financial statements for the current fiscal year, and they will be responsible for coming up with a revised estimate which will reflect their judgment as to the impact of the closure of Yucca Mountain on the liability, and we will be reviewing that carefully at that time.
The Department of Energy's recent actions to dismantle its nuclear stockpile will increase the volume of defense nuclear waste. How has the department planned to accommodate this waste as it shuts down Yucca Mountain?
Well, Yucca Mountain, approximately 10% of Yucca Mountain was designated, as I recall, for high-level defense waste and spent nuclear waste. My understanding is that the current inventory of waste in that category exceeds even the 10% of Yucca Mountain that was reserved for that purpose originally. There are lots of proposals right now to compact the waste, to mix it with, to down blend it, if you will. So, but the fact of the matter is it will have an impact as the level of the waste grows.
Did the Department of Energy consider whether its role in START would be compromised by its decisions on Yucca Mountain?
Well, that obviously is a very fundamental issue, Mr. Gardner, and to be honest with you, it's outside of my area, my purview. I don't know the answer to the question.
Dr. Lyons, do you know if DOE did any analysis under the START implications?
I've not seen such analysis. However, the department recognizes its responsibilities for defense high-level waste. That's never been in question.
Thank you. My time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
That the Department of Energy did not have the authority to close Yucca Mountain.
June 29th, 2010.
Yeah, but you did anyway. I mean, does the rule of law have no say-so? Does the attorney you sought an opinion from trump the administrative procedures that have been set up to hear your concerns?
The Atomic Safety Licensing Board decisions are reviewed by the Commission. The Commission can take review of any ASLB decision, and the Commission, and I was no longer on the Commission at that time, elected to take review of that decision. That moves the responsibility from
the Commission
ASLB
has not
to the
yet,
Commission.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I have limited time. The Commission has not yet issued its report, and frankly, there's some allegations of a politicalization of the process. But was there a stay upon the ruling of the preliminary administrative court, the June 29th, 2010 board? Was there a stay upon that? The ruling has not yet been released by NRC, but clearly you're disregarding it.
Not being a lawyer, I don't want to get into a question of what a stay is in this case. I am positive that my statement is accurate, that the commission has taken the review and the action is with the commission, and the decision of the SLB is moot at this point.
You preempted the action of the commission, if you will. You preempted because they've not yet issued a ruling, but you have shut down Yucca Mountain, even though you were told you didn't have legal standing to do so. And if you're not an attorney, I'd ask next time you bring an attorney, because it's really fundamentally the question that's before the taxpayers. We've just blew $10 billion. It frankly doesn't look like you had legal standing, and I'm getting a little bit of a legal rope-a-dope by you saying that you're not an attorney, and so forth. And I don't mean to be rude, but imagine the frustration. Now let me ask you next. Mr. Friedman's complete testimony in the written portion speaks of a process whereby after you disregarded this Atomic Safety Board's ruling and decided on 10/1/2010 to shut it down, you declared an abandonment of, what was it, 22 metric tons, Mr. Friedman?
You may be referring to the GAO report, Mr.
Oh, I thought it was your report where it was just declared abandoned.
It was some property that was declared abandoned.
Tons. Yes. Now, granted, it was steel and
computers,
iron.
Office equipment, that sort of thing.
Yeah, trailers.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff of both value by bulk and by value. Why did you just declare it abandoned? I mean, frankly, it looks like you were trying to make it so it would be expensive to restart, again, after deciding to disregard the Atomic Safety Board's ruling. Why did DOE just declare it abandoned?
Again, sir, those decisions were carefully reviewed by our general counsel. Abandonment is one of the mechanisms by which property can be disposed. The department was certainly working on an expedited schedule to complete the shutdown within fiscal year 10.
So,
and, I should say that there is a complete inventory underway now, and there will eventually, as we go into the closeout process, there will be a reconciliation.
One of the two, again, for whatever reason, I came back and not entirely organized, but one of the two men had testimony which said that it was a rather hasty shutdown, and that the complete sort of gathering of the information that would have been beneficial was not done, that I gather intellectual property was lost. Am I speaking for one of the two of you?
I would sort of summarize. I think both the IG and GEO had concerns about the lack of a plan to shut down. They basically started shutting down in June of 2010. February of 2010, and had basically completed shutdown by September of 2010. During that time, there was a draft plan that never got finalized. They were trying to get things done quickly, and we raised concerns about that.
So it really looks like there was an attempt to abandon the process in a way which it could not be restarted.
Absolutely not, sir. As part of the quality assurance program, as each decision has been made along the way, the technical justification for that must be recorded in writing.
So who made the decision to abandon tons of material, including things that could have been sold for scrap or given to other federal agencies, instead to turn it over to a contractor? Who made that decision?
There was an evaluation on the prospective value of the property in that decision. However, I believe both of the reports in question here note that the majority of this equipment in question was transferred to other DOE sites, particularly Hanford.
Well, I thought I saw where it was abandoned.
It's declared abandoned, but then under that process, they can transfer it to other sites. So Dr. Lyons is right. Most of it got transferred internally. It was considered unusual, but DOE had the authority to do it. Our concern was, we put this out in our recommendations, that number one, in some cases, they didn't have a good inventory. They say they're working on it, and we say, great. They should have a full accounting for this, for the inventory and what was sold. We still think that remains to be done. And then lastly, we think they should consider a plan to restart if they're compelled to do so. Those were our two recommendations.
I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the three witnesses for their testimony today. I'm sorry that I could not hear their testimony in their entirety, but I will certainly work with my staff and look at your transcript as we go forward. But, Mr. Chairman, by any assessment, this is a very, very complicated issue. But it's clear to me that the Department of Energy's decision to withdraw its application for Yucca Mountain is really the cherry on top of a greatly mismanaged federal exercise. I generally believe that the Department of Energy should follow the process laid out by the Act and maintain focus on the technical and scientific elements of Yucca Mountain rather than the political considerations. But I am a realist, and I understand that all politics are local, and that if any of our respective constituencies came to us and said, this is our number one issue, we would certainly fight tooth and nail to stop it, even if the focus should be technical in nature. Notwithstanding, ratepayers in my home state of North Carolina have contributed $900 million of their hard-earned money to help finance the construction of a permanent repository for our nuclear waste. I believe in nuclear power. I've said it time and time again. It makes up over 30% of my state's generating capacity. I'm embarrassed to tell my constituents that their contributions have amounted to very little, as we appear to be in no better position for solving this problem as we were when we started splitting atoms. We have a responsibility to see this process through and to make it a high priority. So let's talk about some of the options set out by the GAO. Mr. Gaffigan, you stated that an independent organization with predictable funding might be a way to overcome some of the administrative issues we've had with Yucca. Would such an independent organization have to be created by statute, or does the administration have the authority to create it?
Currently, no administration or separate authority exists, so I think it would have to be created.
Obviously, you might eliminate some of the political capriciousness by granting this agency predictable mandatory funding, but eventually the decision to site a depository will be inherently political, and we all understand that. That said, outside of funding, how could this independent agency be able to overcome the political hurdles with any greater efficiency than the Department of Energy?
Yeah, we sort of had two lessons learned, and that's part of it. That's sort of the first lesson, is that perhaps some consistent leadership, consistent policy on where we're going would be a mechanism to get there. Overcoming the many factors, including public acceptance, which is recognized by many as a hurdle that should be addressed, just as well as the technical and safety issues. The key to those sorts of things is transparency, education, economic incentives. Those are some of the tools that have been used in other countries to gain acceptance for such a site.
You've talked about greater transparency in the process. Where do you see historical transparency gaps, and how might they be closed?
It sort of goes back to the 60s when they looked at a facility in Kansas. There was, a feeling on the part of the folks that were out there that there wasn't full disclosure of what the information was. Even in the process of Yucca Mountain, there's been some complaints about not full disclosure of the different issues out there. And I think DOE, to its credit, has worked on that and tried to establish some credibility, but it's still got a ways to go, particularly in the eyes of the folks from Nevada.
The American people may not take notice of this issue based upon the spent fuel issue alone, but I guarantee you that they will notice when the cost of not completing the project becomes known. Mr. Friedman, to you, sir, in your testimony, I'm told by my staff that you stated that the U.S. Spent nuclear fuel litigation liability is approximately $15 billion. If the Yucca project is completely scuttled and no clear path is established, when will the government have to make these payments, and to whom?
I don't know the answer to your question, Mr. Butterfield. I can't give you a precise date, but there will be payments that will have to be made, there's no doubt, and our view is that it's likely that there will be a significant increase in the gross amount of the payments.
And will my constituents and the chairman's constituents and all of our constituents ever see any refund of the money that they have contributed to this date?
Well, that's not for me to say. I mean, if this project actually comes to a close, if there's a legislative fix or amendment or a series of amendments or new legislation, then it wouldn't surprise me that there would be some attempt to try to reimburse those who have made those contributions, only to see them go for naught.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Bass of New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The answer to Mr. Butterworth's question is that the only way you're going to get their money back is to open this is to open this project. Lots of questions have been asked today, and Dr. Lyons, I have to say, I almost feel sorry for you. You know what's going on here. Everybody in the audience knows what's going on here. The Democrats, Mr. Inslee, Mr. Green, all the Republicans know what's going on here. And it's unfortunate that we even have to have this hearing. The process of debating what to do with high-level and low-level nuclear waste began when I was a state rep in New Hampshire in the early 1980s, and I believe there was a site in New Hampshire that was under consideration in some of the earlier rounds. We've gone through an excruciatingly detailed and complete analysis. We've passed legislation. There have been battles that have occurred, as we've heard, through different administrations. Different parties have been in charge. It's been bipartisan, and we have come to as good a conclusion as we could possibly come to solve this issue, which is of grave national importance. And then the Energy Secretary and the President, and perhaps others that have a political interest in this issue, stop the project, potentially incur expensive legislation, waste 10 and possibly $25 billion of taxpayers' money on the basis of undefined technical criteria and social acceptance, which is an interesting comment, deferring everything to a blue ribbon commission that can't consider any sites. In essence, what we are proposing here is that the clock be wound back to the early 80s again, and we begin this process over again. Now, Dr. Lyons, you're the Undersecretary for Nuclear Energy, so you're pretty high up in this organization, but you can't make any comments. Can you define social acceptance, what it is? And again, I feel sorry for you because I know you can't answer these questions because there are no answers to the questions because there aren't any really valid criteria for doing what you're doing. But give it a try.
I'm the Assistant Secretary, sir, not the Undersecretary.
Okay.
I grew up in Nevada. I visited Nevada. I worked in Nevada. I saw the opposition in Nevada growing. I saw it as it was created. I have watched over many, many years while Nevada has progressively blocked each of the various initiatives that was attempted with regard to Yucca. In my view, there are many, many steps that remain before Yucca Mountain could ever be opened. The views in Nevada, for which I'm using the buzzword of public acceptance or social acceptance, that opposition that has been spawned in Nevada, I believe will continue to block progress towards opening Yucca Mountain.
Not one single member of this subcommittee that I've seen has come out and shared your view, both Republican and Democratic, and I understand that there are no members from Nevada here. Is there any place in the United States where you could build this without local opposition, in your opinion?
Well, I've used the example several times today about the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico that enjoys very, very strong local and regional support. And the way that process developed, as well as the way repositories have been cited in other countries, which is what the BRC is evaluating, I think provides extremely important lessons as to how to do this job right and get the public education, generate the public acceptance, which I'm convinced can be achieved.
Well, I beg to differ with you. I think that that it's been pretty clear that the GAO, the Inspector General, will hear at a later panel that this project was ready to go. The taxpayers have funded it. The taxpayers are going to be on the hook for billions and billions of dollars more if we don't proceed. And the justification for its hopefully suspension, not termination, are as of yet undefined technical criteria, social acceptance criteria, and what's not mentioned is political criteria. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. That concludes the testimony of our first panel and the questions. So thank you very much for your time and commitment to be here today and for bearing with us through the votes. Thank you. And we will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. We've got a 4 o'clock markup beginning, and we will give you as much.
You start? We were just impaneling them, and we apologize, but I'm very excited to have the second panel here, and in order of Again, as I'll go from left to right, your right to left, we have on panel 2 Mr. Charles Hollis, Chairman of Nye County Board of County Commissioners, Nye County, Nevada. Good to see you again, sir. Mr. Martin Mausch, partner Egan, Fitzpatrick, Mausch, and Lawrence on behalf of the state of Nevada. Welcome, sir. Mr. Greg White, Commissioner, Michigan Public Services Commission, and Mr. Christopher Coots, former acting director of DOE's Office for Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. Again, your full statement will be submitted for the record. You have 5 minutes, and we'll start with you, Mr. Hollis. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify about local support in Nevada for Yucca Mountain. I am Gary Hollis, and I'm the chairman of the Nye County Board of Commissioners, state of Nevada. As you know, Mr. Chairman, Yucca Mountain is located entirely within Nye County. While this testimony is mine, I want you to know that it reflects the views of the other 4 county commissioners as well. And as well as views of many political and local leaders in rural Nevada. Mr. Chairman, we deeply appreciate that you and Congressman Green and Burgess took time to visit Yucca Mountain and to meet local people in Nevada. As you learned, there are many of us who live next to Yucca Mountain who support the completion of the licensing process. Most of us who live in the vicinity believe that the decision on Yucca Mountain should be made based on sound science, and this can only happen if full review by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. If the NRC determines that the repository is safe, I favor its construction. I'm sure you understand no one is more concerned about the safety and welfare of the citizens of Nye County than me and the other 4 commissioners. It is my community. My family, my friends live and work here. I would never accept the federal facility to be located in my county if I thought it was unsafe, no matter what the economic benefits were attached to it. Frankly, I resent suggestions that any of the Nye County commissioners would jeopardize the health safety of our citizens for any sum of money. That would not happen on my watch. When Congress passed the 1987 amendment to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it provided money for local communities impacted by Yucca Mountain to fund oversight activities. Nye County used that money to create an independent science program. We had unbiased scientists to conduct the work. After years of effort, they found no reason to believe that the repository could not be built and operated safely. We have provided that information to the Department of Energy and the public. Our work was top quality, and the results were available to everyone. But to get the full picture, we need to see all the evidence from every source. That includes the information from Nye County, DOE, NRC staff, and the state of Nevada. We want every piece of evidence to be reviewed so a final determination of the safety of Yucca Mountain can be made. That determination can only happen if the licensing process is complete. Mr. Chairman, if the NRC determines that the repository can't be built and operated safely, I would be the first person to object to its construction. I only ask that all the facts and the science are reviewed by the NRC and that the legal establishment by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act is carried out. Let the facts dictate the results, not politics. My views are shared by leaders of other rural Nevada counties. Upon being elected last year, Nye County Commissioner Dan Chinhofen initiated a resolution of support for the licensing application and worked with Esmeralda, Mineral, Lander, Churchill, Lincoln counties to do the same. Thus, these six rural counties that would see the most impact from Yucca Mountain called on DOE and NRC to complete the licensing process. We are willing to live by the results of a fair scientific review process. I ask permission to put all 6 resolutions into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Beyond the political leaders of those other counties, a majority of the residents of the county support a license application. Mr. Chairman, let me point out that all 5 Nye County Commissioners expressed their support for Yucca Mountain, and all were elected or re-elected by our citizens. Therefore, it is not accurate to say there is no local support for Yucca Mountain. The people that live in the neighborhood do support completion of the licensing process. Thank you. I'm available to answer any questions you may have. I'm here with 2 of the county's technical professionals, and they are available to answer questions as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Malsh. Sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and your full statement's in the record.
Thank you.
And check your microphone before we go through this. There's a button.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the state of Nevada at this hearing today. My name is Martin Malsh. I have practiced law in the nuclear energy field and nuclear waste fields for over 40 years in both the public and private sectors, and I am a special Deputy Attorney General for the state of Nevada. The failure of the Yucca Mountain Repository Program is a direct result of decisions taken beginning almost 25 years ago. A decent respect for history would have suggested that those decisions created a very high risk of program failure, but the lessons of history were disregarded. The original 1982 Nuclear Waste Policy Act foresaw many of the problems that now afflict the Yucca Mountain program. Among other things, it sought fairness and redundancy by requiring multiple sites from which to choose ultimate locations for repositories, and it strove for regional equity by setting up site selection programs for 2 facilities, one in the west and one in the east. However, all this was scrapped in 1987. Congress decreed that all repository development efforts must focus now on just one site in Nevada, and it did so notwithstanding incomplete scientific information and the fact that now spent reactor fuel and high-level waste from every region in the country would now be sent to a single western state with no nuclear power plants or high-level waste generating facilities. After 1987, there was only one possible site, and inevitably, as more and more dollars were spent, it became progressively more difficult to admit that selection of Yucca Mountain had been a mistake. But we know now things we did not know in 1987. We now know that groundwater will reach the wastes at the site in about 50 years, not the hundreds or thousands of years that had been originally thought. We now know that Yucca Mountain is not dry. Total water seepage into the tunnels where the waste will be located will be as much as 130,000 kilograms per year. These and other serious problems led to even more exotic and doubtful engineering fixes. When it appeared likely that the Yucca Mountain site could not satisfy certain EPA and NRC licensing requirements, the requirements were simply eliminated. These actions by Congress and then by EPA, DOE, and NRC destroyed the credibility of the program. Public opinion in Nevada, which until 1987 had been mixed with regard to Yucca Mountain, now solidified into strong, consistent, across-the-board opposition. In biannual surveys done between 1989 and 2010, opposition to the project has remained constant at between 63 and over 70%. While there has been and continues to be some support for the project in small rural counties surrounding the site, such support cannot be extrapolated to the wider Nevada population. Taken together, the 6 counties sometimes cited as evincing some level of support for DOE's program comprise only a tiny fraction of the state's population. In 2002, Nevada carefully evaluated the effects of a prospective Yucca repository on the state, its communities, and the economy, and that report documents the potential, among other things, for significant risks to Nevada's unique tourism-based economy and property value losses and health effects associated with transportation. While it can be difficult to terminate a federal project when large amounts of money have been spent, there is no sense now in spending good money after bad. DOE's finding that Yucca Mountain is unworkable, the decision to seek withdrawal of the license application, and the establishment of the Blue Ribbon Commission to look for alternatives for the management and storage of spent fuel were all the right and lawful things to do. They have the potential to put the county on a path to a safer, more cost-effective, and expeditious solution to managing spent fuel and high-level waste. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my remarks, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. The chair now recognizes Mr. White. Again, your full statement's in the record. You have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Shimkus, and I'd like to thank you for your leadership on this issue. As you know, my name is Greg White, and I'm a commissioner for the Michigan Public Service Commission. I'm appearing today on behalf of the Public Service Commission in Michigan, electricity ratepayers, and the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. I've been involved with this issue of the disposal of spent nuclear fuel from commercial reactors since shortly after the Nuclear Waste Policy Act passed in 1983, which established the policy that the federal government has the responsibility for the safe and permanent disposal of government and commercial nuclear waste in a geologic repository, and that the customers that benefit from the electricity generated from nuclear power pay for the commercial share of the disposal costs. That was the deal, and we agreed to that deal. The fee payments to the Nuclear Waste Fund began in June of 1983 as required by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. I'm here to tell you that that is the only component of that program that has ever worked as intended. Nearly 30 years later, the federal government has our money, we have their waste. When the Department of Energy submitted a license application to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in June of 2008, we knew that it could take 3 to 4 years to carefully review the safety and other aspects of this first-of-a-kind facility. We were not prepared to learn that after more than 20 years of study and nearly $15 billion spent, that a different Secretary of Energy would withdraw the license application with prejudice in March of 2010 with no indication that the site is unsafe or that the application is flawed. Instead, the motion to withdraw cited only that Yucca Mountain is considered not a workable option. The Department of Energy took other steps to terminate the Yucca Mountain project that are documented in the April report of the GAO, including disbanding of the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management that had managed the program. Like others, we have questioned the legal and administrative authority of the Department of Energy to disband this office. As you know, the Department of Energy requested no appropriations for the waste program for fiscal year 2011 or 2012, except for support for the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future. Yet when the Nuclear Energy Institute and the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners suggested that the Secretary of Energy suspend fee payments by utilities to the Nuclear Waste Fund in 2009, that was denied with an unconvincing pronouncement that all fees are essential. NARUC and the NEI have appealed that decision to the Federal Court of Appeals, which is pending. We can only speculate how much time and money it will take the U.S. to be ready to accept spent nuclear fuel for disposal if it is other than Yucca Mountain, but it's likely to be decades. It seems essential, then, that we seek out and develop one or more central interim storage facilities to take used fuel from the 9 sites where reactors are currently shut down and the property cannot be decommissioned and returned to other productive uses because the waste remains, such as the former Big Rock nuclear power plant in Michigan. Regardless of what storage, transportation, or disposal solutions the Blue Ribbon Commission may recommend, they will need certain and reliable financing support. Concerning the financial impacts of terminating of Yucca Mountain, a more predictable funding mechanism would certainly enhance future waste management. Also, an independent organization outside of the Department of Energy could be more effective in siting and developing a permanent repository. If Yucca Mountain's termination is sustained, it means starting over to find and develop a repository, since there is clear consensus that at least one site is needed in all scenarios. Unfortunately, there are too many unknowns to begin to forecast how long it would take to authorize, search and select, fully evaluate, license, design, construct, and be ready to begin deposits in a new repository. Yet another 20 years seems to be highly conservative. With that, I would conclude my testimony and make myself available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the chair would like to recognize Mr. Coots for 5 minutes. Again, your full statements in the record, and then welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I am Christopher Coots, former Principal Deputy Director and the Department of Energy's now defunct Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. I appreciate the invitation to appear before the subcommittee. I will focus my remarks on the recently released GAO report that was discussed earlier by Mr. Gaffigan and the administration's decision to terminate the Yucca Mountain project. As background, for 25 years, I served in various technical and management positions in virtually every program area within the office. I became the Principal Deputy Director of the program in 2007 and was the acting director from January 2009 until I retired in early 2010 after 35 years of federal service. While serving in the program, I was reminded on a daily basis of the formidable challenges that were given to the program by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. As impatient as those who followed the program have been over the years with its progress, I believe that any new attempt to establish disposal or interim storage facilities outside the confines of the Act will be met by many new and likely more vexing challenges, regardless of the organization or entity that is established to administer the effort. Now, why will any new effort be more problematic? The answer to that question lies partly in the advances society has experienced in instant communication and information flow. When the program proceeded through the facility siting process in the 1980s for 2 repositories and an interim storage facility, the internet was not in place. Email was not available to the general public, nor did the social media of today exist. The 24/7 news cycle we now live in will create many opportunities for those opposed to such facilities to spread rumors and disinformation. As a result, the credibility of any new process will be severely challenged from its inception. In addition, the state of Nevada has given a clear blueprint to those opposed to such facilities. Delay, delay, delay. And it should be noted that I do not in any way begrudge the lawsuits or other actions the state has taken over the years to attempt to impede the project. It was certainly their right to do so, and I fully respect that. But accordingly, the time frame of decades noted in the GAO report for a new repository is nothing more than notional and does not appear to stem from a comprehensive evaluation of the program's past experience, nor the changes that have occurred since the 1980s. The report suggests that an independent entity outside of the federal government could be more successful. The grass is always greener, rules here. It is also my belief that Congress should have the final word on facility siting, and that ultimately any siting decision will be a political decision informed by thorough technical evaluation, just as in the case of Yucca Mountain. It is difficult to understand the GAO report's so-called benefit of terminating the Yucca Mountain project to afford DOE the opportunity to explore other approaches. DOE has no authority to undertake new approaches outside the confines of the Act, and history has shown that the consensus needed to develop a new policy path will not come easily or quickly. Because the development of Yucca Mountain has been such a contentious and protracted process, it is being suggested that only consensual siting of these facilities should be pursued. I would submit to the subcommittee that the U.S. and international experience in this area proves otherwise. In my discussions over the years with the directors of repository programs abroad, they have consistently expressed their concerns that due to the very long time frames repository programs take to develop, any political consensus at the beginning can evaporate with one election, just as it has in the U.S. with Yucca Mountain. At the end of the day, implementing a repository program requires steady, consistent national leadership. In closing, beside its questioned legality, the administration's decision to terminate the Yucca Mountain project is disturbing because Yucca Mountain has not failed any technical or regulatory test. The thousands of scientists and engineers and others that worked on the project over the years believe, as I believe, that the site would meet the stringent regulations of the EPA and the NRC and assure that these materials would not adversely impact future generations and the environment. Given the substantial investment this nation has made in the site and in the policy that has been supported by every prior administration since 1982, I believe the nation deserves a final and definitive answer regarding Yucca Mountain from the NRC licensing process. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss these issues, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that the subcommittee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Coots, and I would recognize myself for 5 minutes for the first round of questioning. Again, Mr. Hollis, I want to welcome you here. And I think in my visit out there, which is my second visit, I think it was even better that I drove than what you folks used to fly a helicopter out there, because it gave you an idea of how far the definition of local is. The size of the federal property that consists, and Yucca Mountain's inside. How big is that landmass?
Well, the county's around 18,000 square miles.
I was told that the federal property, the BLM, the DOE, the nuclear test site, is the size of the state of Rhode Island. Is that correct?
Well, the test site is just about the size of the state of Rhode Island.
So,
but that doesn't account for the Tonopah test range and the Nellis bombing range.
So I mean, it's a large site, and Yucca is the mountain itself is not on the outskirts of this federal government land. It's my recollection that we went through the gate. We still drove 10 or 15 miles to get to Yucca Mountain. Is that true?
If I could answer that question.
Yes, Mr. Coots.
Mr. Chairman, the site itself is basically half of it is on the Nevada test site and the other half is on BLM land.
BLM.
So
from the security gate, that's how far of a drive? From the first, I mean,
Well, if you entered around Mercury, since the gate that we used to use is now closed, I mean, you probably drove about 5 miles from that gate to try to get to a place near the mountain. That's my guess.
So when we talk about local consideration, what is the county? What's your county seat? What's the city, the county seat?
Tonopah, it's from where I live in Pahrump, it's 165 miles to the county seat.
Okay, and Pahrump, which is the town I visited, is that the closest community of size?
Yes, it's approximately 34,000.
34,000, and it's
the county's about 43,000.
So you are local.
Yes.
In the region. So if we want to talk to local individuals now, in driving from Las Vegas, it's like my hometown's Collinsville, Illinois. The state capital is a town called Springfield. It's about 90 miles. Isn't that the distance?
Actually, it's probably 130 miles, 135 miles from Las Vegas. If you're
no one in Collinsville, Illinois would say we are local to Springfield. And no one in Springfield, Illinois would say Collinsville is local. And so we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate a local voice in this debate on what the local citizens want to do. And all you're asking is for the NRC to make a decision.
That's correct.
Because there's always a debate, and we had the commissioners here, and this is not hearing on the commissioners, but we feel that the NRC commissioners have voted.
Well,
we would like to know what the result of that vote is.
Absolutely, that's what we want to know.
And so you're also speaking for other counties that are closer in proximity to the city of Las Vegas.
Well, I'm pretty well speak for all the counties around Yucca Mountain that have impact to Yucca Mountain. Are those 6 counties are the ones that I'm talking about, and that I have resolutions here in support of.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Coots, I want to go. You mentioned that in your bio you were in the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And that office was enacted by what statute gave that office the authority?
The Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982.
And that law is still valid, correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
And and who is in charge of, and how many people are in the Civilian Radioactive Waste Management Office right now?
0.
And would it be your opinion that if there's no one fulfilling the role that's under the law, that someone is not abiding by the law?
Although I'm not a lawyer, it would seem to me the department is not following through with the law.
And I have 11 seconds, so let me find out. How long would it take to reconstitute the office and finally reach an answer, and how much that will cost?
Let me preface my estimate by saying this all presupposes that the department did not demolish the office as it tried to demolish the licensing process with impunity. Basically, the motion that they filed was with prejudice, which meant that if indeed it was withdrawn, from the NRC, it could never be resubmitted. So if the department has treated the office that way, then I think it will take many years. If the records are in reasonable shape, and if you can coax the staff, and I'm not talking about the federal staff, I'm talking about the contractor and scientific staff back, and you can get the contractors in place, you're going to have to get a law firm on again to direct the licensing process. Having said that, it would probably take 2 to 3 years to reformulate the office and to get it in a position where it could begin to defend the license again. And from that point, it'll probably take, assuming the NRC has issued their SCR report or nearby close to that, probably at least another 3 years to get a final answer out of the commission. So that would probably be about a 5 to 6 year time period. That's my estimate. Assuming, again, they didn't terminate the office with prejudice.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. I'd like to recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Couch, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit of your background. You're an engineer by training?
Yes, sir. I have 2 degrees in engineering, and I'm also a licensed professional engineer.
And you've worked with the Department of Energy?
I joined the Department of Energy back in 1978, and I joined the program in 1985.
And you've been involved in these, when you say the program, you mean the program involved with Yucca Mountain?
The Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. I lived through just about all the siting challenges, everything else through the act, and I lived in the program, or I was in the program during virtually its entire existence.
Are you familiar with the legislation that's been passed and signed into law regarding Yucca Mountain? Is that something you've...
Very familiar, sir.
You've read it?
Very many times.
Have you found anything in there which set a standard in law which talked about social acceptance of sightings of this?
No, sir. I've read it many times, and I never found anything like that in there.
Are you familiar with the Department of Energy or anybody involved with any of these projects ever using that as a standard to override scientific or legal information?
Only the current Secretary of Energy.
You heard in the previous testimony was multiple times related to their counsel and their Secretary of Energy saying that was the standard that they were going to use. It reminds me of some other standards that are used when they look at when the White House talked about changing some of the other mandates and regulations that come up. They would look at some other social aspects of this as well. But I'm curious as we go through this if you have any idea of any standard in engineering at all where this is applied anywhere else in the universe that we're familiar with. I'll just take it, our solar system perhaps, if we can.
Well, no, sir, I'm not. And I think the irony of all this, as the Nye County representative represented, there is local support. There is acceptance of a repository there, assuming, and I'd say appropriate local support, because I think they're concerned about its safety. The bottom line is that just as Dr. Lyons indicated that the local community around Carlsbad would like it, well, I don't think the local community around Nye County is any different in that regard than Carlsbad. So again, I don't understand the standard. I don't know how it was applied. I wasn't involved in those conversations, so your guess is as good as mine.
You had made some reference before to the term consensus. Certainly one can find someone in any community that's either the NIMBY principle applies or banana, which means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything.
Yes, I know.
Is the other element here. I mentioned the scientists in trying to find a safe place to put nuclear fuel. It is safe where it is now, but not long-term, if we're looking at long-term sites here too. The Department of Energy describes Yucca as unworkable, and it's a 25-year stalemate. Do you agree with those terms?
I don't believe it's been a stalemate, sir. I think it's been a very contentious process, and I would not deny that, but I don't believe it was a stalemate. In fact,
these 25 years weren't spent with just people wringing their hands. They were working on scientific information.
That's correct, sir. And we had a great victory in submitting the license application back in 2008. So I wouldn't look at that as a stalemate. Unfortunately, they truncated the licensing process, but as I indicated in my testimony, I believe the nation deserves an answer on Yucca Mountain.
And as far as you can tell, through your knowledge and experience, that answer has not been forthcoming, other than to say they're looking for some consensus or social aspects on this. But no other, you heard in my previous question of the DOE Secretary that we have not seen any scientific, legal, any information out there of any way, shape, or form which would contraindicate what has been put forth as licensure up to this time.
And I agree with your. The answer is no, and I will say that as long as I was principal deputy and acting director in the program during this administration, I was never asked for any technical information regarding the site. So my assumption was that technical information was not part of the Secretary's decision-making process. And had anyone else in my program been asked for it, I would have known about it. So the bottom line is, to my knowledge, the Secretary's decision was not a technical one. At least he didn't ask for any information from the program for it. And he must have used other criteria, which, again, since I wasn't part of his decision-making process, I can't comment on.
I thank you. With that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes ranking member Mr. Green from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the patience. I apologize to our witnesses. We actually had a markup of the full committee downstairs on a bill I was working on, and also I met with the chair on a little pipeline from Canada legislation that we're working on. So, but I appreciate, obviously, energy is really important where I come from, and I appreciate the opportunity a few weeks ago to come out and tour Yucca Mountain. I've supported it for my whole career in Congress, and it was good to see on the ground what was happening. Mr. Couts, in your testimony, you mentioned the potential challenges with restarting the selection process for nuclear waste storage facility. I have concern about that process. I said with our earlier panel, you mentioned your disagreement at GAO's recommendation for independent commission and Congress should have final say. Do you also take issue with the Blue Ribbon Commission and their potential recommendations?
If you're asking my opinion about the preliminary recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission, I would use three words. I would say they're predictable, I would say they're disturbing, and I would also say they're amusing. And let me try to explain why. Predictable in the sense that if you read the President's executive order, it's very clear that the President had made up his mind that Yucca Mountain wasn't an option. He talked about in his order that the last 25 years has basically been not unworkable, he used some other words, but it was very clear charge to the commission about what his views were. So what came out of it was Yucca Mountain obviously was not on the table, and they want to restart the whole process. And that's the real troubling part of it, because I don't think anyone at the commission really understands what it will be like for this country to go through another siting process for a repository. It was a gut-wrenching, very, very difficult time, not only inside the Department of Energy, but outside the Department of Energy. And now, as I indicated, with the social media that we have and the opportunity for disinformation, it will be magnitudes more challenging than it was back in the 80s. And let me just finish with the amusing aspect of the preliminary recommendations is that it took so long for them to come up with their predictable, disturbing conclusions.
Okay. Mr. Hollis, thank you for being here today. And again, thank you and for your hospitality. We had a brief meeting there. You mentioned your desire to see Yucca Mountain proceed if the health and safety of individuals as the area is protected. You mentioned resolutions passed by Ney County and other areas. Can you discuss the resolutions and further explain the position of your county?
Well, the 6 resolutions is just asking the DOE, Department of Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to finish the process. Let's finish the license application, and that's what we're supporting. We want them to finish their job. We can't make evaluation of the safety and of Yucca Mountain without all the evidence, and we're asking for all the evidence. And the evidence is that or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to follow the licensing application. It has to be completed before we'll know. Okay. If it's unsafe, I'll be the first one to stand up and say no. But if it is safe, I'll be the first one to say, let's build it.
Well, I typically go with the folks who live in the neighborhood, and you're about as close as folks that live in that neighborhood as you can get. Mr. White, your testimony, you discussed the need to develop at least one interim storage facility at these potential facilities could be a net savings to the federal government. You suggest one of 9 potential locations where reactors were shut down. Can you go further in detail on this suggestion, and how could it help solve or ease the burden of our nuclear storage dilemma?
Well, there's a couple different aspects to that question. What we're really, one of the things we're really concerned about is the fact that the program has not performed at all. We have nothing. And we have 9 sites around the country where there are shut down reactors, and many of those plants, for example, the Big Rock nuclear plant in Michigan, they've decommissioned that site as much as they possibly can. What's left on that 750-acre site is a independent spent fuel storage facility. It's just the dry casks sitting on a pad. So we cannot return that property to productive use. So we think that there could be some lessons learned if we could consolidate at least the fuel at those 9 sites, those 9 shut down sites, into one location. And it would achieve a savings because currently the customers and the utilities that own those sites are paying those costs continually, despite the fact that they're no longer generating electricity at that site.
Okay. You also discussed financing the disposal of nuclear waste in the Nuclear Waste Fund. If the Nuclear Waste Fund were not used for the purpose you discussed, what would alternative means for financing the disposal of nuclear waste? Because we know part of this came out of our ratepayers, including my area, and part of it came from just general revenue. Where would that, where would we get the other funding?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have the answer to that. We agreed to what I called the deal, where the customers would pay the cost. The beneficiaries of nuclear generation would pay the cost of the program. What we're frustrated by is we have paid and paid and paid, and we have nothing to show for it. And I can argue that the customers paid for the design of the spent fuel pools at the reactors. We paid for the reconsolidation when those pools filled because the federal government hadn't taken the waste. We paid again when that fuel was removed and put into dry casks. All the while, we're paying for a federal program with nothing to show for it.
I appreciate it. I know my time's run out. Mr. Chairman, no matter what happens with Yucca Mountain, we still need a nuclear waste disposal facility, and the President supports investment as alternative energy, and Secretary Chu actually gave testimony for our committee that we're unable to meet the President's goals if we do not invest in nuclear energy. Part of that is also finding a place to have a permanent storage, and this means we need to have it stored safely somewhere. And if not Yucca, then we don't want to have members of Congress 25 years from now like we are saying, okay, where are we going to put this? It's still sitting on these sites all over the country. So thank you for the hearing.
I thank my colleague, and now I'd like to recognize Congressman Whitfield from Kentucky, who chairs the Energy and Air Subcommittee. So very knowledgeable on energy issues.
Well, I hope I can live up to your expectations, John.
I hope you can, too.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. I think it's very difficult myself to come to any conclusion except that this administration is ignoring the law, because the Policy Act of 1982 did set this up. In 2002, the Yucca Mountain was approved as the site. And for this administration to pull back its application for construction, authorization for construction, before any decision has been made, it seems to me is a violation of the law. Would you agree with that, Mr. Coots?
Let me preface by saying I'm an engineer who's read the Act very many times, but I tend to agree with the administrative law judges at the NRC, who, when they read the Act, could not find any basis for the Secretary to withdraw the application that in Section 114, which is the same section that tells him to submit it. Right. Now, if there was a flaw in the license application, right, then I think the Secretary could pull it back and fix it and then resubmit it. But just to withdraw it with prejudice, in other words, saying that it's never going to be submitted again, I certainly don't see that authority in the Act.
And then, obviously, the NRC's Construction Authorization Board agreed with that because they refused to allow them to withdraw the application. And that was in June of 2010. And so we've had 1 year for the commissioners to take this issue up and make some decision. And I think that anyone who has heard Chairman Yatsko testify would certainly walk away with the conclusion that he's simply dragging his feet because one of the commissioners' term is going to expire maybe the end of this month, and he knows that the appointment of the next commissioner will be voting with him. And yet, to do that is violating the Policy Act. So it appears, even just a reasonable interpretation is this is nothing but politics. And then I heard you answer Mr. Murphy and say you were the acting director of the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. So if the Secretary was going to withdraw this application, it would appear that he would come to you for some technical information, and yet you testified that he did not do so. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. He did not.
And so if he didn't want technical information and making a decision to withdraw, what kind of information would he need to make a decision like that?
Well, if I could just give you my experience of the program, having been in it for 25 years, and again, I was a career SES, I was an acting director, and over the years I've been involved in lots of meetings and been told not to attend lots of meetings, and the ones I've been told not to attend are typically those that are among political appointees, where they're going to discuss political issues.
Right.
So my assumption was, since I was not involved in the decision-making process, that those types of discussions were going on.
Yeah.
Now, we did not have a political for the program. There was not one appointed, so therefore there was no one from the program from a politically appointed by the president in those meetings. But that's what my assumption was because I wasn't involved.
Well, I think the logical conclusion is that it was political. It was done to help Harry Reid, and the American people are the ones that are going to suffer from this. Over $15 billion has been invested already. Ratepayers for utilities are paying fees for this. Taxpayers are now legally liable to pay over $15 billion in judgments against the federal government because they cannot live up to the responsibilities of the Policy Act of 1982. So it seems to me, and then you take the 6 counties closest to the repository, as Mr. Hollis has testified, actually support the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at least going through the process and making some final decision, and have adopted resolutions basically to that effect. So I don't think there's any question that this is bad news for the American people. It's costly to American people, taxpayers, and it's probably a violation of the Policy Act of 1982.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Mr. Cutts, appreciate your testimony. I think the GAO analysis kind of supports your assertion. Yucca Mountain is the most studied place on the planet, and I think you were there for most of the studying. Just want to remind the second panel that the record will remain open for 10 days. This hearing may be followed up by individual questions by my colleagues, so if you could then answer those and get those back to us as expeditiously as possible, we would appreciate it. We will continue to move forward on addressing these obviously disconcerting events that many of us question the legality of, and look forward to moving types of legislation that'll help enter another voice of what the vast majority of representatives of this constitutional republic would like to do based upon previous agreements and laws passed. So we thank you for your testimony and appreciate your time. And members have 10 days to submit questions for the record. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.